Why does a piece of paper buy bread? Or why does a number on a screen mean survival? The question is simple, almost childlike, yet the more you dwell on it, the more it begins to unsettle the mind. Bread is made from grain and labor, harvested from soil, and kneaded by human hands. Paper is fragile, a flimsy scrap that cannot nourish or protect, and numbers are fleeting symbols of light that vanish as quickly as you close a screen. And yet, mysteriously, we accept that they can be exchanged. That one bill, no heavier than air, can fill a stomach. That a line of digits, weightless and invisible, can grant a roof over your head. Pause for a moment and let that sink in. Something so unreal has become so powerful that it can hold sway over life itself. The truth hidden beneath this paradox is not the paper, not the number, not even the bread. The true foundation is trust. Without trust, money would collapse into useless scraps and empty signs. Without trust, you could hand a shopkeeper a bill and be met with laughter. Without trust, a bank balance would be meaningless, no more significant than a row of scribbles on a page. And yet here we are, living in a world where those symbols dictate our time, our labor, our dreams. The invisible foundation is belief, not substance. But belief is fragile. It cannot be touched or stored. It is not like gold that can be weighed or land that can be measured. It lives only in the space between people, in the quiet, unspoken agreements we share without ever truly questioning them. Think about the ease with which you go about your day. You swipe a card at a cafe, confident that the machine will approve your purchase, confident that the cafe owner will honor the exchange. They in turn trust their suppliers, who trust the distributors, who trust the farmers, who trust the soil and the rain. An unbroken chain of faith, fragile yet astonishingly durable, stretching across countless lives and places. We don't see it, and yet it holds us together, and it is precisely this invisibility that makes it feel so natural. We rarely stop to ask why this web of trust functions at all. Why, for example, should a piece of paper carry more weight than a loaf of bread? Or why should a line of numbers on a glowing screen carry the power to decide where you sleep? Somewhere along the way we stopped noticing the absurdity of it and started accepting it as inevitable. In this way, trust has become the greatest illusion of all, so pervasive that it disappears from sight. Take a moment to reflect on this. Consider how many times today you acted within this illusion without hesitation. Every bus ticket, every online order, every payslip, every transfer. Each one is only possible because someone somewhere believes that the system will hold. You trusted the driver would take your ticket. The online store trusted you would pay. Your employer trusted the company could afford your salary. All of it is linked by nothing but belief. And yet it feels so ordinary, so unremarkable, that we rarely stop to recognize its strangeness. When you think of money as material, you miss the point. The real material is not paper or metal, but faith itself. What we trade is not ink or coin, but confidence. This realization can be disorienting, even a little eerie. It suggests that our entire economic life is built on something that could vanish overnight, not because of fire or flood, but because of doubt. History offers examples of this, moments when trust collapsed, and with it, the power of money. Hyperinflations, bank runs, financial crashes, all symptoms of belief crumbling under pressure. And yet for most of us, most of the time, the illusion holds steady. We carry on, lulled into its stability, forgetting that it is an invisible foundation we walk upon. It is worth asking then, how did this begin? How did humans first decide that something worthless in itself could carry value if only enough people believed in it? The answer takes us far back, before paper, before coins, before even the glint of gold. Long before the electronic balances we stare at today, people were already experimenting with this invisible foundation. They found objects in nature, smooth shells, rare stones, carved tokens, and imbued them with value. Not because the objects themselves could feed or shelter them, but because they could carry trust across distance and time. And so, to understand why a piece of paper can buy bread, or why numbers on a screen can mean survival, we must step back into those early exchanges, where belief first took root. We must journey to the shores where shells were gathered, to the villages where stones were carved, to the first experiments in human trust that laid the groundwork for everything that followed. The story begins not with banks or markets, but with shells and stones, humble tokens that became the seeds of the vast illusion we live in today. Shells and stones. It may seem like the humblest of objects, the kind of things you might step over absent-mindedly on a beach or in a riverbed, hardly giving them a second glance. And yet, for long stretches of human history, they were among the most precious things in the world. Entire lives, villages, and even kingdoms were shaped by the trust these objects carried. It is mind-bending when you pause and realize that something as ordinary as a seashell, fragile and small, could once command a person's labor, food, or even loyalty. These were not tools or weapons, not food or clothing. They could not keep you warm, nor could they help you cut wood or plow a field. Their power did not lie in their material utility. It lay in the shared belief that they mattered, that they carried meaning beyond their form. And this is where the story of money begins, not with shining coins of gold or carefully printed notes, but with shells and stones, objects that, by themselves, were almost useless, yet when clothed in human trust, became capable of organizing entire societies. When we think of shells being used as money, we might imagine scattered tribal scenes, small communities trading with one another in rudimentary ways. But the truth is far more expansive. The cowrie shell, for example, became one of the most widespread forms of currency in human history, used across Africa, Asia, and the Pacific for centuries. They were smooth, glossy, and naturally shaped in a way that made them look special, different from ordinary shells. They could be strung together in necklaces or carried in small bags, and because they were rare enough to require effort to gather but abundant enough to circulate, they fit perfectly into the strange role of being symbols of exchange. People trusted them, not because of what they could do, but because everyone around them agreed that they were worth something. And then there are the stones. The island of Yap in Micronesia is famous for its giant rai stones, massive discs of limestone, some as large as 4 meters across, carved painstakingly with primitive tools and carried across the sea by canoe. These stones were so large that they could not even be moved once they were placed. Instead, ownership was transferred through stories. If a family traded one stone for another good, the stone would remain in place by the roadside or in a village square. But everyone would remember that its ownership had changed. Imagine this for a moment. A form of currency that doesn't even move, that cannot be tucked into a pocket or handed across a counter, but still manages to shape trade and trust because people believe in the story attached to it. A stone, silent and immovable, became wealth because people agreed it was. The significance of these shells and stones lies in what they reveal about us. They tell us that money has never really been about material. It has always been about imagination, about trust, about the invisible bonds that hold human communities together. When a villager handed over a cowrie shell in exchange for food, what was really being exchanged was not the shell itself, but the belief that the shell could, in turn, be trusted by someone else in the future. When ownership of a rai stone changed hands, nothing physically shifted except the air carrying the words of agreement, but society adjusted as though wealth itself had migrated. In this way, shells and stones remind us that the foundation of money is not in matter, but in meaning. Pause here and let that sink in. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine kneeling on a beach, digging into the sand for shells. They gleam faintly in the sunlight, smooth and curved, and you know that these delicate objects could, in the right context, buy you food, clothing, even a home. Or imagine standing beside a massive stone disc, carved by hands long gone, its surface worn by centuries of weather. You cannot lift it, you cannot even shift it, and yet it holds the same weight in the community as a bank account might today. How strange, how haunting, that these simple objects could anchor systems of trust stretching across generations. What makes this so powerful and so mysterious is that it challenges our modern sense of value. We are used to thinking of money as backed by governments, by institutions, by the machinery of banks and laws. But the shells and stones remind us that all of this is secondary. The real power has always been in trust itself. If enough people believe an object has value, it does. If they stop believing, it doesn't. Nothing more is needed. This realization unsettles us because it strips away the layers of complexity and brings us face to face with the fragility of the whole system. Your wallet, your bank account, your digital balance, they are all modern shells and stones, held aloft only by the faith we collectively invest in them. The implications are enormous. If shells and stones could once organize entire economies, then it follows that money has always been a kind of fiction, a useful fiction, perhaps the most useful one humanity has ever created, but a fiction nonetheless. And yet, like all fictions, it can be believed so deeply that it becomes indistinguishable from reality. A ray stone that never moves still changes ownership. A shell that cannot feed or clothe you still becomes the means by which you survive. A number on a screen, intangible and weightless, can still decide the fate of nations. The fiction, believed in by enough people, becomes real. Consider how this plays out in our own lives. You work a number of hours, and at the end of the week, you are given a paycheck or a transfer into your account. You know that these digits can be exchanged for goods and services, but they are no more material than the ownership of a ray stone. Nothing has changed hands except a symbol, and yet the world adjusts as though wealth has been created. The modern system is faster, more efficient, but it is not fundamentally different from villagers acknowledging the transfer of a giant stone. The continuity stretches across centuries, from shells and stones to paper and screens. The story is always the same. Money is not the object. Money is the trust. This also raises a question about the very nature of wealth. If money is only valuable because of belief, then what is it we are really pursuing when we seek wealth? Are we chasing objects, or are we chasing the invisible trust those objects represent? It is unsettling to think that what we sacrifice our hours for, what we build our lives around, is not the physical reality of money, but the imagined value that lies behind it. Shells and stones strip away the illusion. They show us money in its rawest form, pure trust, naked belief, with no disguise of utility to comfort us. Take another pause and breathe this in. Imagine a world where the belief vanishes, where shells become only shells and stones become only stones. What would remain? Would people still toil, still trade, still build? Or would the fabric of society unravel like a rope pulled apart, threads falling loose because the knot of trust has been undone? These are not idle questions. History shows us that when belief falters, collapse follows. When cowrie shells were devalued by the sudden flooding of supply, their power faded overnight. When colonizers dismissed rye stones as primitive curiosities, their role as money weakened, even though the stones themselves had not changed. Belief shifted, and so did reality. The paradox is almost dreamlike. We build our lives around things that, on their own, are nothing. We exchange labor, sweat, and time for shells, stones, paper, or numbers, because we believe they will be accepted by others in turn. It is like standing in a theater, applauding an actor, not because the performance is real, but because everyone around you has agreed to pretend. The difference, of course, is that money's illusion is not contained within a stage. It spills into every corner of life, shaping nations, building empires, and binding strangers together in a trust so deep it feels unbreakable. But it is not unbreakable. It never has been. This is why shells and stones matter. They remind us that money is not inevitable, not natural, not carved into the structure of the universe. It is a human invention, fragile and flexible, born out of necessity and imagination. And if something so small as a shell or so immovable as a stone can carry the weight of an economy, then the very ground of our modern systems is just as precarious. We live in a house built on trust, and the walls hold only as long as we keep believing they do. As you let this thought drift through your mind, consider how strange it is that the earliest currencies were chosen not for their utility but for their symbolism. A shell gleamed because it was rare, because it came from the sea, because it carried with it an aura of the exotic. A stone loomed because it was heavy, enduring, carved by effort and sweat. These choices were not practical, they were poetic. They reveal that money is not only a tool of survival, but also a story we tell ourselves, a story of permanence, of scarcity, of meaning. Even in its earliest forms, money was as much about imagination as it was about exchange. And so we arrive at a quiet realization. If money begins with shells and stones, then money begins with belief dressed in beauty, in weight, in rarity. Its foundation is trust, but its clothing is narrative. To see this clearly is to feel both humbled and unsettled, to sense how much of our lives are governed by things that exist only because we allow them to. From here, the story will move forward. If shells and stones taught us that trust can make the ordinary extraordinary, then the next chapter reveals how trust attached itself to something even shinier, more enduring, more seductive to the human mind. Gold, with its gleam and its resistance to decay, became the next stage in this long journey. Where shells were fragile and stones were immovable, gold carried the illusion of permanence and universality. To drift from shells and stones into the gold illusion is to follow the thread of trust as it weaves itself into a new material, one that would shape empires and still echo into our lives today. The gold illusion. Gold has always gleamed brighter in the human imagination than perhaps any other material. It is a metal that does not rust, that does not tarnish, that seems to resist time itself. When sunlight strikes it, gold reflects a glow that feels almost eternal, as though it holds within it the warmth of the sun. To pick up a piece of gold is to hold something heavy, dense, and unyielding, and yet also something beautiful. It is not like iron, which can build a plow. It is not like bronze, which can forge a weapon. Gold's practical uses are astonishingly limited compared to its value, and yet across cultures and centuries, gold has stood as the ultimate symbol of wealth. Empires were built around it, wars were fought over it, lives were lost in pursuit of it. There is something deeply mysterious about this. Why should a soft, relatively useless metal become the very foundation of economies, the standard by which wealth was measured? The answer, once again, lies not in the material itself, but in the power of belief. Gold's significance is not in what it can do, but in what it represents. In the ancient world, its luster suggested permanence, immortality, even divinity. Pharaohs were buried in golden masks because gold was thought to embody eternity. Kings and rulers adorned themselves with gold crowns and ornaments to signal their divine right to rule, as though the glow of the metal could transfer into their flesh and make them untouchable. In temples, gold was offered to gods not because the gods needed it, but because humans believed nothing less than the eternal metal was worthy of the eternal. Gold became a mirror of trust, a reflection of something that seemed incorruptible, and so humans poured their faith into it. But if we pause to think carefully, we realize how strange this is. Gold cannot feed you. Gold cannot clothe you. You cannot plant it, eat it, or breathe it. If you were stranded on an island with only gold, you would starve. Its very physical qualities, its softness, its lack of industrial strength, make it almost useless in survival terms. And yet, because it does not decay, because it glows, because it is rare, humans decided it was valuable. That decision spread and hardened into a truth so accepted that it became nearly impossible to question. The gold illusion is one of the deepest in human history, one of the most enduring tricks of collective trust. Take a moment here. Imagine holding a gold coin in your hand. Feel its weight, heavier than you expect for its size. See the way it gleams in the light, a glow that seems alive. Now imagine standing in a marketplace thousands of years ago, where that single coin could secure you food, clothing, even protection. The coin itself did none of those things, but everyone around you agreed that it could. This agreement gave the coin its power, and the power of the coin reinforced the agreement. A perfect loop of trust, an illusion that became reality simply because enough people accepted it. Gold also carried with it a sense of universality. While shells might be valued in one culture and stones in another, gold seemed to transcend boundaries. Wherever you went, people could be persuaded to value it. A merchant traveling from the Mediterranean to Asia could carry gold and expect to be received with open hands. This gave gold a power that few other materials could match. The power of being trusted across vast distances, across languages, across cultures. It was as though humanity collectively decided that gold was the language of wealth, and the illusion spread until it became nearly unshakable. But illusions, even when deeply rooted, come with contradictions. One of the strangest aspects of gold is how it concentrates desire. Because it is scarce, because it is beautiful, because it represents trust, it becomes something people are willing to kill for. Entire conquests were driven by the hunger for gold. The Spanish Empire crossed oceans in pursuit of it, stripping the Americas of vast quantities of the metal, leaving behind destruction and suffering. For what? For a metal that could not be eaten, that could not heal wounds, that could not shelter anyone from the rain. This is the madness of the gold illusion, that humans could sacrifice everything for something that, in a purely practical sense, offers almost nothing. And yet, if we are honest, gold does provide something, but not in the way we first imagine. Gold provides continuity of trust. It provides a symbol of permanence in a world that feels fleeting. It provides something that seems immune to decay, and in this way, it soothes a deep human fear, the fear of impermanence. To hold gold is to hold something that seems to stand outside of time, something that will not crumble away like food, something that will not rust like iron. Gold becomes not just wealth, but a kind of reassurance, a promise that the value you hold today will still be there tomorrow. This is why banks hoarded it, why nations measured their currencies against it, why vaults were built to guard it. Gold became the anchor for trust itself. The contradiction is that gold's permanence is both its strength and its weakness. Because it does not decay, it seems eternal. But because it cannot be consumed, it is inert. It is the perfect mirror of money, useless by itself, but priceless in the imagination. The gold illusion is the belief that permanence equals value, that beauty equals trust. But these are associations we made, not truths of nature. A mountain may be eternal, yet it is not money. A sunset may be beautiful, yet it is not currency. Gold somehow slipped through the cracks of human thought and became the exception. Take another pause here. Let yourself drift into the paradox. Feel the calm of recognizing how strange it all is, how something so simple could shape so much of human history. Empires rose and fell on the back of this illusion. Fortunes were made and lost. Lives were traded and destroyed. All because humans agreed that this glowing metal was worth more than food, more than land, more than life itself. What does this reveal about us? That our wealth has always been tied not to material survival, but to symbols of trust. That we are creatures of meaning as much as creatures of need. We cannot live on gold, and yet we live by it. This realization shakes the foundation of what we think wealth is. If wealth is not utility but belief, then the pursuit of wealth is the pursuit of illusions that we collectively enforce. This is not to say the illusion is meaningless. Far from it. The gold illusion provided the stability upon which trade, nations, and economies were built. Without it, there may have been no global exchange, no international trade, no vast empires connected by a common symbol of trust. The illusion is fragile, but it is also powerful. Its fragility is in its dependence on belief. Its power is in its ability to organize entire civilizations. As time passed, however, even gold revealed its limits. Carrying it was heavy. Guarding it was dangerous. Scarcity, once its strength, became a weakness when economies needed flexibility. Trust needed to evolve, to move beyond the physical glow of metal and into something even stranger, even more fragile. And so humanity began to shift again, to place its faith not in shells, not in stones, not even in gold, but in paper. Thin, flammable, meaningless paper, stamped with symbols of authority, declared to be valuable simply because we agreed it was. The illusion that began with shells and matured with gold would reach its most ethereal form in paper promises, and that is where our story now turns. Paper promises. Paper seems so fragile, doesn't it? It can tear with a careless pull. It can be crumpled in a fist. It can be burned to ash in seconds by a single spark. And yet, for centuries now, paper has carried the weight of nations. It is strange to think about how trust migrated from gleaming, enduring gold to something as delicate and impermanent as paper. But this too is part of the great story of money, and it tells us something profound about the human mind. That belief can be so strong, so immovable, that it can transform the weakest material into the most powerful force. To look at a banknote is to look at nothing more than ink on pressed fiber, and yet to hold it in your hand is to feel a strange reassurance that what you possess is not only yours, but will be honored by others. This is the paradox of paper promises, and it is one of the most haunting transformations in the history of money. The significance of this shift cannot be overstated. Gold, for all its illusions, still had a physical presence. It gleamed, it resisted decay, it carried a sense of permanence. But paper asked for a leap of faith unlike anything before. You had to believe that a slip of fiber, stamped with numbers and symbols, could stand in for value that you could not see or touch. The leap was not into permanence but into promise. It was the belief that behind every note stood the guarantee of something real. Gold in a vault, silver in storage, authority in a king's decree, or the stability of a nation. The paper itself was worthless. What mattered was the story attached to it, the story that said, "This paper means something," because we all agree it does. Pause for a moment and imagine receiving your first paycheck in crisp notes. The scent of the ink is sharp, the texture rough against your fingertips. Each bill is small, light, flimsy. Yet together they can buy food, rent, medicine, entertainment, even your future comfort. None of those things are contained within the paper itself, but the paper unlocks them. You cannot eat it, but it can fill your table with meals. You cannot live in it, but it can pay for shelter. You cannot drink it, but it can be exchanged for water. The note is powerless on its own, but once belief surrounds it, it becomes a master key to the world. This is the strange magic of paper promises. Historically, the rise of paper money reveals just how far humans were willing to lean into trust. In China, during the Tang and Song dynasties, merchants began to issue promissory notes as stand-ins for the cumbersome bulk of coins. Carrying large quantities of metal was heavy and dangerous. Paper, by contrast, was light and efficient. But its use required a new mental shift, to accept that the paper did not contain the value, but merely represented it. This was revolutionary, because it meant that money was detaching from material altogether and becoming more purely symbolic. Later in Europe, banks issued notes that promised redemption in gold or silver. For centuries, these were the promises to pay, a reassurance that the flimsy note in your hand was backed by something solid elsewhere. Yet eventually, the connection itself was severed. Today, most paper money is not backed by gold at all. It is backed only by trust in the issuing government. The illusion grew even more abstract, but the trust endured. And here lies the contradiction. Paper money is powerful precisely because it is weak. Its fragility reminds us that its worth does not lie in the material, but in the agreement. The note could be destroyed, but the promise behind it remains. A torn bill can be replaced. A burned stack can be reissued. The trust is not in the fiber, but in the system that declares the fiber meaningful. The fragility of paper teaches us the strength of belief. Take a moment to reflect on this. Imagine sitting in a cafe, watching bills being exchanged at the counter. To an alien observer, this would seem absurd. People hand over slips of printed paper, and in return they receive food, drink, or service. The paper itself has no nutritional value, no taste, no warmth. But the transaction proceeds smoothly because everyone in the room shares the same story. The paper stands for something else. The cafe owner trusts that the paper will, in turn, be accepted elsewhere. The customer trusts that the paper will buy what they need. The system of trust continues, invisible yet binding, fragile yet unbroken. The implications of paper promises ripple across history. They reveal how willing humans are to exchange material anchors for conceptual ones. With gold, at least, the illusion was tied to something rare, something physical, something enduring. With paper, the illusion became purer. It was no longer about the object itself, but entirely about the promise it carried. This deepened the reliance on institutions, kings, banks, governments. To believe in paper is to believe in the authority that issues it. If the authority collapses, the paper collapses with it. If the trust fails, the promise dissolves. And yet, for centuries, this system has endured, reshaping the very way we live and think. There is something quietly unsettling about this. When you hold a banknote, you are holding not wealth, but trust incarnate. You are holding a promise from a system you cannot see, a system that stretches across borders and centuries. The banknote in your wallet connects you to farmers, merchants, corporations, and nations. It ties you into a web of exchange that is vast beyond comprehension. And all of this is held together not by the fibers of the paper, but by the fibers of belief. Consider also how this shift paved the way for everything that followed. Once trust could be invested in paper, it was only a small step to invest it in even more abstract forms: checks, credit cards, digital balances. The leap had already been made. If paper could be money, then why not symbols on a screen? Why not numbers in a database? The story that began with shells and stones and matured with gold took its most radical turn with paper promises, because here, for the first time, money fully shed its need for material backing. It became almost pure story, pure agreement, and pure trust. Take another pause, breathe deeply, and let that realization settle. The bill in your pocket is a ghost of value, a shadow of something that no longer needs to exist. It represents not gold, not goods, not even a specific resource, but simply the faith that tomorrow someone else will accept it too. That is all it is. And yet, that is enough. This invites an existential question. If money is just a promise, what happens when promises are broken? What happens when governments collapse, when inflation spirals, when paper becomes worthless? History is full of such moments. Hyperinflation in Weimar Germany, where children played with stacks of notes that could no longer buy bread. Zimbabwe, where trillion-dollar bills lost meaning. Argentina, where trust wavered and notes became fragile reminders of broken faith. Paper reveals both the strength and weakness of the system. It shows us that money is as durable as trust, and no more. And yet, there is beauty in this fragility too. Paper promises remind us that money is ultimately a human invention, something shaped not by the laws of physics, but by the laws of belief. It is fragile because we are fragile. It is enduring because we endure. In this way, every banknote becomes not only a symbol of wealth, but also a mirror of humanity's strange capacity to believe together. From here, the story leads naturally to another layer. the authority that stamps the promise. Paper by itself is nothing. The ink on its surface is what gives it power, and behind the ink is authority, the king's seal, the government's decree, the institution's guarantee. If paper taught us that trust could exist without material, then the seal teaches us that trust must be anchored in power. The promise is only as good as the hand that signs it. And so, as the story of money continues, we must turn our attention to the king's seal and to the weight of authority that underwrites every promise we hold. The king's seal. A seal pressed into wax, a signature scrawled across parchment, a crest stamped on a coin. These marks may appear small, almost ornamental, but for centuries they have carried immense power. They are the bridge between paper and trust, the proof that what looks like nothing is, in fact, something. This is the story of authority transforming fragility into solidity. Without the king's seal, paper is just paper. With it, paper becomes wealth. Without the monarch's emblem, a coin is only metal. With it, it becomes money. This reliance on the seal is not just a historical quirk. It reveals something profound about the human condition. That belief to function at scale often needs an anchor, a visible mark of power that assures us the promise is real. The significance of the seal lies in its ability to convert imagination into law. A piece of parchment may say that it represents value, but without authority to back it, who would believe it? The king's seal was a guarantee, a stamp that transformed doubt into certainty. It told people that behind this fragile note or coin stood not just paper or metal, but the weight of the crown, the armies it commanded, and the divine right it claimed. The seal was never merely decoration. It was the embodiment of legitimacy. It declared, "This is not just a symbol, it is an order, and you will obey it." And in that declaration, money ceased to be just an agreement among people and became an edict that could be enforced, one that was backed by swords, laws, and punishments. Imagine for a moment being a villager centuries ago. You receive a silver coin stamped with the face of your king. You may never have seen this ruler in your life. You may never travel to his court or hear his voice. And yet, when you hold that coin, you hold his authority in your palm. It is as if his presence has been miniaturized into metal, and by accepting the coin, you also accept the rule that gave it meaning. Now extend this thought further. What happens when the king dies? The coin does not lose its value because the authority of the crown outlives the man. The seal is not about an individual. It is about the enduring idea of legitimacy, about the continuity of power that turns fragile belief into enduring systems. This is what makes the seal mind-bending. It shows us that money is not simply about shared trust among equals, but about enforced trust under authority. It is not just about people agreeing to believe in a promise. It is about people being compelled to honor the promise because power demands it. The seal is not only a symbol of trust, it is also a reminder of coercion. Trust is never entirely voluntary when it is stamped with the weight of kings. Take a moment here and picture rows of coins laid out on a table, each with a different ruler's face stamped upon it. Imagine how strange it must feel to trade the face of one king for the face of another, as if your wealth changes allegiance with every exchange. But beneath this strangeness lies the deeper truth. Money is not just an economic tool, but a political one. To hold a coin is to hold a fragment of the political order that minted it. The king's seal is not only about wealth, but about allegiance. It tells you whose laws you live under, whose armies defend you or threaten you, and whose rule determines the value of your labor. There are contradictions here that unsettle the mind. The king's seal is meant to assure trust, but in another sense, it reveals distrust. Without the seal, without the stamp of authority, people might not believe the promise at all. The seal exists because trust on its own may not be strong enough. Authority steps in to enforce what belief cannot sustain. This is why counterfeiters were punished so harshly throughout history, not just because they produced false money, but because they threatened the authority of the seal. To counterfeit was not only to deceive, It was to rebel, to challenge the crown itself, to fracture the fragile illusion that the seal was unbreakable. Think of the wax seal pressed onto a letter. The seal is not the message, nor is it the parchment. It does not contain the words. And yet, without it, the message cannot be trusted. This is the paradox of the seal in money. It is not the coin, not the paper, not the wealth, but it is what makes all of those things real. It is like a shadow that defines the shape of light, an absence that makes presence possible. Without the seal, money collapses back into meaningless material. The implications are vast. The seal shows us that money, at its core, is inseparable from power. It is not merely a neutral medium of exchange, it is a declaration of authority. Every note, every coin, every promise carries with it a political story, a tale of who has the right to declare value and who is forced to accept it. When you hand over money, you are not only participating in an economic exchange, you are reaffirming the authority that underwrites it. Even today, when you look at your currency, you will find seals, signatures, coats of arms, or national emblems. These are not ornamental. They are echoes of the ancient need for authority to sanctify trust. Take another pause and let yourself consider this unsettling thought. What you carry in your wallet is not really yours. It belongs, in the deepest sense, to the authority that issued it. You are merely a temporary holder, a participant in a larger story. You are permitted to use it, but its ultimate legitimacy comes from elsewhere. This is why governments can recall notes, change designs, or declare currencies invalid. The power is never in the paper or the coin. The power is always in the seal. And yet, this realization brings us closer to the paradox at the heart of money. If the seal enforces trust, then the trust is never truly free. It is coerced by power, shaped by politics, tied to structures that are often invisible but ever present. Belief is never pure when it is bound to authority. We may like to think that money is simply about mutual agreement, but the king's seal reminds us that agreement often sits on a foundation of force. To accept a coin was not only to believe in its value, but to accept the rule of the one who minted it. But authority, like gold, carries its own fragility. Kings rise and fall, empires expand and collapse. Seals lose their power when the authority behind them crumbles. A coin stamped with the face of a dead ruler may for a time continue to circulate, but eventually its legitimacy fades, its promise collapses, and it becomes just metal again. Authority is as fragile as belief, and when both falter, money evaporates into nothingness. And so, we see how the story evolves. Shells and stones showed us that trust could transform objects into wealth. Gold showed us that beauty and permanence could anchor belief. Paper promises showed us that trust could exist without material strength, floating on nothing but agreement. And now, the king's seal shows us that belief itself is never free. It must be backed by authority, enforced by power, protected by institutions. The seal is the stamp that bridges fragility and strength, belief and coercion. It is the symbol that makes paper credible, that makes coins legitimate, that makes promises binding. As you let these reflections settle, allow yourself to drift into the next step of the journey. If the seal represents the authority of kings and rulers, then where did that authority migrate when crowns faded and monarchies weakened? The answer lies in institutions that rose to replace the monarchs: banks, those towering temples of finance where authority is no longer vested in a single ruler, but in an entire system. If the king's seal told us that money is a promise enforced by power, banks tell us that money is a faith sustained by ritual. And so, we now turn to the next chapter in this story. The rise of banks as temples, where the sacred trust of money is no longer guarded by kings, but by the silent vaults and rituals of finance. Banks as temples. Banks rise in the heart of cities like monuments, their facades lined with towering columns, their entrances marked by grand doors of polished stone or steel. To walk into a bank is to feel a subtle shift in atmosphere, as though you have stepped into a place where silence and seriousness are enforced not by rule, but by unspoken reverence. There is a weight here, a solemnity, not unlike that of entering a cathedral. This comparison is not accidental. For centuries, banks have functioned not only as institutions of finance, but as temples of trust, housing rituals, guardians and mysteries that keep the fragile belief in money alive. The Seal of Kings may have guaranteed legitimacy in one era, but in the modern age, it is the bank that carries that burden, cloaked in the aura of ritual and sanctity. The significance of banks lies not merely in their function of holding money, but in their role as keepers of belief. A vault of gold is not what gives a bank its power. Rather, it is the perception that what you deposit will be there tomorrow, untouched and secure. It is the trust that the digits on your account statement, invisible and abstract, represent something real that you can call upon when needed. Like temples, banks are not merely physical spaces. They are theaters of belief, carefully designed to transform fragile symbols into pillars of confidence. Every marble step, every echoing chamber, every impenetrable vault door serves as architecture for the imagination, convincing us that here, within these walls, the fiction of money becomes reality. Pause for a moment and picture yourself entering such a building. The air is cool, the ceilings are high, the tellers are positioned like officiants in a ritual, mediating the invisible flow of value. Behind the counters and within the vaults lies not only money, but the machinery of trust. You hand over a check, you receive a statement, and though nothing material passes between you and the bank, you leave reassured. The ritual has been performed. The trust has been reaffirmed. The bank has served its role as a temple, reminding you that your belief is not alone, but shared by countless others. Historically, this evolution was inevitable. As economies grew, the authority of kings was no longer sufficient to sustain trust on a larger scale. Authority needed institutions that could outlive rulers, that could transcend borders, that could function as enduring guardians of belief. Banks stepped into this role, offering not only safekeeping, but legitimacy. To deposit wealth into a bank was to sanctify it, to wrap it in the authority of an institution that seemed above the chaos of individual lives. Banks became the temples where the rituals of modern trust were performed daily. Deposits, withdrawals, loans, credits, all symbolic acts that kept the story of money alive. But what is striking, and quietly unsettling, is how ritualized these acts truly are. Consider how little happens in a physical sense when you deposit money into an account. A few digits are typed, a receipt is printed, and nothing tangible changes hands. Yet the effect is profound. You walk away knowing that your money is safe, that it can be recalled at will, that it has been sanctified by the institution's promise. In this sense, banks are temples not of gold or paper, but of ritualized belief. Each action is a liturgy, each signature a prayer, each ledger a scripture. Take another pause here. Imagine the vault, that most sacred of bank spaces. Thick doors, multiple locks, layers of steel and concrete. It is not only about security, but about spectacle. The vault is designed to be almost mythical, a sanctum that no ordinary person enters but that everyone imagines. Its purpose is less to guard wealth than to symbolize inviolability. It tells a story that what lies within cannot be touched, cannot be stolen, cannot be doubted. Like a holy relic in a shrine, the vault reassures not by presence, but by imagination. You will never see inside, but you believe, and belief is enough. The implications of this are far-reaching. If banks are temples, then banking is a religion of trust. The faithful line up not for communion, but for credit. The prayers are not whispered to gods, but signed in contracts. The offerings are not incense, but deposits, each one a token of belief that the system will endure. And just as religions have schisms and crises of faith, so too do banks face moments of collapse. A bank run is nothing less than a crisis of belief, when the faithful all demand proof at once, and the illusion shatters because the ritual cannot keep up with reality. When this happens, we see the fragility of the system exposed, that behind the marble and the vaults, money is still only a story, and trust is its only foundation. This comparison may feel unsettling, even sacrilegious, but it is instructive. It reminds us that money has never been about material, but about meaning. And banks, like temples, are designed to cultivate meaning, to shield it from doubt, to perpetuate it across generations. This is why bank buildings are designed with such grandeur, why they loom with pillars like ancient temples of Greece or Rome. The architecture itself whispers reassurance. You may doubt yourself, but do not doubt us. We are eternal, we are solid, we will endure. Yet, of course, banks are not eternal. They collapse, they fail, they betray trust. The rituals can falter, the belief can crack. When this happens, the entire society trembles, because the temple has not just lost its sanctity, but has revealed its emptiness. And yet, even after collapse, new banks rise again, new temples are built, new rituals performed. The cycle repeats because humans cannot live without trust, and trust needs its temples. Take another deep breath here, and let this realization settle. Banks are not merely buildings. They are stages where the great drama of money is enacted daily. The rituals may seem mundane, signatures, receipts, balances, but they are, in fact, the glue that holds the economy together. Without them, the fiction would dissolve. With them, the fiction becomes stronger than reality. And now, as we drift further into the story of money, we come to a new stage. If banks are temples, then what happens when the rituals leave the temple walls? What happens when the vaults are replaced by servers, when the ledgers become digital, when the rituals are performed not in marble halls, but on glowing screens in the palms of our hands? This is the digital leap, where money sheds even its paper body and becomes pure information. It is the next chapter in the long journey of trust, and it asks us once again to take a leap of faith into the invisible. The digital leap. The digital leap is perhaps the most radical transformation money has ever undergone, though we are so accustomed to it that we rarely stop to think about just how strange it is. For thousands of years, money had some kind of physical anchor, whether shells, stones, gold, or paper. You could hold it in your hand, pass it across a table, and lock it in a chest. It had weight, texture, even a smell. But today, most of the money in the world does not exist in any physical sense. It lives as numbers on screens, as entries in databases, as streams of code passing invisibly between servers. You cannot touch it, you cannot smell it, you cannot lock it in a chest. And yet it governs your life more than ever before. This is the digital leap, the point where money leaves the material world and becomes pure information. The significance of this shift is staggering. When you glance at your bank balance on a phone app, you are not looking at stacks of bills stored somewhere with your name written on them. You are looking at digits, abstractions, signals of trust that ripple across networks of machines. The numbers could change with a keystroke, and yet they feel as solid as any coin or note. You can walk into a store and exchange those digits for food. You can pay a bill without ever seeing a dollar. You can buy something from the other side of the world without ever touching currency. The leap is not only in technology, but in imagination. We are now asked to believe in something even less tangible than paper promises. We are asked to believe in pure data, in invisible flows of value moving through the veins of the digital world. Pause and reflect for a moment. Imagine trying to explain this to someone from the age of shells and stones. My money is real, you might say, though I cannot hold it, though it has no weight. They would shake their heads in disbelief. What do you mean your money has no weight? They might ask. What do you mean it is only numbers on a glowing screen? And yet, this is exactly the system we live in. We carry devices in our pockets that can summon food, rides, shelter, entertainment, all by transferring invisible digits between accounts. To live in the digital age is to live in a world where the fiction of money has shed even its last attachment to matter. The implications of this are profound and at times unsettling. Digital money has accelerated everything. Transactions that once required time, distance, or trust now happen instantly. You can send money across the globe in seconds. You can swipe a card and walk out with goods before the transaction has even been settled behind the scenes. This speed makes life smoother, but it also detaches us further from the reality of what money once was. It becomes harder to see money as something finite, something tied to effort, when all it takes is the flicker of numbers on a screen. The leap into digital makes money feel infinite, effortless, frictionless, and this illusion shapes how we live and spend. There is also a quiet contradiction here. On the surface, digital money feels modern, liberating, efficient. But beneath the surface, it makes us more dependent than ever on invisible systems we cannot see or control. A power outage, a server crash, a hacking breach. All these could erase or distort the digits we rely upon. We place our trust not only in governments and banks, but now in networks, machines, and code. The temple has expanded. Its walls are now server farms humming in the dark, fiber optic cables stretching under oceans, satellites orbiting above us. The new priests are programmers, technicians, and central bankers whose tools are invisible algorithms rather than visible seals. Take another moment, breathe slowly, and let the scale of this sink in. Every time you buy something online, every time your card is swiped, every time your paycheck is deposited, you are participating in a ritual of digital trust. You never see the money, you never touch it, and yet you believe. This is the ultimate leap of faith, the purest form of trust, yet in the story of money. The digital leap also raises existential questions. If money is now nothing but numbers, what stops us from creating infinite amounts of it? The answer, of course, is that limits are still enforced by authority, by rules coded into systems, by the decisions of central banks. But the illusion is powerful. For many, the digital world makes money feel unreal, as though it can be summoned or vanished at will. Debt becomes easier to ignore when it is just digits. Wealth becomes harder to grasp when it grows or shrinks by thousands with the twitch of a market. The digital leap amplifies the fiction, blurs the line between reality and belief, until we forget there was ever a line at all. Yet strangely, the digital leap also reveals the essence of money more clearly than ever. By stripping away shells, stones, gold, and paper, we are left with the naked truth. Money is, and always has been, a story of trust. The digital world makes that story more obvious. There is nothing to hide behind, no gleaming metal or fragile fiber to comfort us. There are only numbers, and we trust them. That is both beautiful and terrifying. Pause again and reflect on your own life. How much of your sense of safety is tied to numbers on a screen? How many hours of your life are exchanged for digits that you cannot hold? How much of your identity, your future, your freedom rests on the belief that these numbers will remain meaningful tomorrow? The digital leap forces us to confront these questions. It reminds us that our lives are woven into systems we rarely think about, systems that can seem eternal until the moment they crack. And yet, there is a kind of wonder here too. The digital leap allows us to send value across the globe at the speed of light. It allows a student in one country to pay tuition in another without touching a single coin. It allows families to send remittances home across oceans with the tap of a finger. It allows new forms of value, cryptocurrencies, tokens, credits, to emerge and challenge old systems. The digital leap is not only about fragility, it is also about possibility. It shows us how far trust can stretch, how deeply humans can believe in shared illusions. But with possibility comes risk. In the digital world, money can vanish with a glitch. A forgotten password can lock away fortunes. A malicious attack can unravel trust overnight. The leap into the digital has expanded trust, but it has also expanded vulnerability. This is the paradox of progress. The more seamless the illusion becomes, the more fragile it truly is. And so we find ourselves standing at a threshold. On one side lies the comfort of shells, stones, and gold, tangible anchors of belief. On the other lies the shimmering abstraction of pure numbers, a trust so refined it no longer needs matter at all. We live in the in-between, suspended by the invisible networks that carry our value. From here, the story must continue, because the digital leap is not the end. It is the gateway to something even stranger, the spell of credit. If digital money asks us to believe in numbers that exist today, credit asks us to believe in numbers that do not exist yet. It pulls the future into the present, selling tomorrow's time in exchange for today's desire. This is the next chapter of the illusion, the next step in the journey of trust. From the digital leap, we move now into the credit spell, where belief no longer concerns what we have, but what we might one day have, and where the fiction stretches forward into the unseen future. The credit spell. Credit is one of the most haunting inventions of human civilization because it bends time itself. Unlike shells, gold, or even paper promises, credit does not deal in the present. It deals in the future. To swipe a card, to sign a loan, to borrow money is to summon value that does not exist yet, to call upon tomorrow's labor, tomorrow's hours, tomorrow's trust, and to bring them into the present. This is the credit spell, the ability to live today by mortgaging the future. If money has always been a fiction of trust, then credit is fiction stretched even further, belief extended not only across space, but across time. And when we pause to think about it, when we let the thoughts settle in our minds, we realize how eerie it is that so much of our lives are constructed on promises we have not yet fulfilled, on hours we have not yet lived, on work we have not yet done. The significance of credit is that it makes the invisible visible. It allows us to buy houses we cannot yet afford, to drive cars we have not yet earned, to eat meals paid for with tomorrow's wages. It is a spell that reshapes reality, collapsing the boundaries of time. Without it, our lives would be narrower, confined to what we could purchase only with what we already had. With it, we can leap ahead, constructing futures on the scaffolding of debt. It is intoxicating, empowering, but also deeply unsettling. Because the moment you borrow, you are not free. You are bound. You have chained a part of your future to your present desires. Credit, then, is not only a tool of freedom, it is also a form of servitude, a contract that quietly declares, these hours of your life, still unwritten, already belong to someone else. Pause here and picture yourself signing a loan agreement. The pen scratches against paper, your name etched in ink. The money is transferred instantly, digits appearing in your account. You feel the flush of relief, the joy of possibility. And yet, somewhere in that moment, the future tilts. 1,000 small hours, scattered across years, are now claimed. They will be called upon in monthly payments, in deductions, in obligations that will not let you rest until the contract is fulfilled. This is the spell at work, the binding of future time into present comfort, the enchantment that makes invisible chains feel like opportunity. Historically, credit is as old as civilization itself. In ancient Mesopotamia, clay tablets recorded debts in grain and silver, promises to deliver harvests not yet grown, work not yet completed. Temples and palaces served as the first lenders, issuing loans that tied farmers and merchants to cycles of repayment. In medieval Europe, merchants extended credit to one another, weaving networks of trust that stretched across borders and seas. And with the rise of banks, credit became institutionalized, formalized into contracts and systems that reached into every household. Today, the spell has become nearly invisible. Credit cards slip easily into wallets, lines of credit are extended with a few keystrokes, and debt becomes a quiet hum in the background of life, shaping choices without always being noticed. What makes credit mind-bending is that it thrives on absence. Unlike gold or paper, there is nothing physically exchanged at the moment. What you borrow is not wealth that already exists, but the promise of wealth yet to come. The bank does not hand you gold from a vault. It types digits into a system, creating money out of belief in your ability to repay. In this sense, credit is alchemy, It conjures value from nothing, weaving possibility into reality through trust. But the trust is fragile, conditional, and always waiting to be tested. Fail to repay, and the spell breaks. The illusion collapses, leaving behind only the harsh reality of obligation unmet. Take a moment and breathe with this thought. How much of your life has already been sold to the future? How many hours of work have already been claimed by contracts, by promises, by obligations you have signed? To live in a world of credit is to live in a world where your future self is constantly negotiating with your present self, where your desires today are purchased with the labor of tomorrow. And the contradiction is that we call this freedom. We celebrate the ability to buy now, pay later, to live ahead of our means. But is it freedom to enjoy the present if the cost is binding the future? Or is it simply another form of servitude disguised as choice? This contradiction has profound implications. Credit allows economies to grow because it accelerates consumption and investment. Without credit, there would be fewer homes, fewer businesses, fewer opportunities seized. Credit fuels ambition, drives innovation, and expands possibility. But it also deepens inequality, trapping some in cycles of debt they can never escape. For the wealthy, credit is a tool, a way to leverage resources, to expand fortunes, to take risks. For the poor, credit is often a trap, a way to survive today at the expense of tomorrow, a chain that grows heavier with every missed payment, every mounting interest charge. The spell does not cast itself equally. It favors those already positioned to control their futures and ensnares those already vulnerable. There is also a haunting existential layer. Credit makes us live multiple times at once. We are never only in the present. We are constantly paying for the past, borrowing from the future, balancing obligations across timelines. The present becomes crowded, burdened with debts owed and promises made. We are, in a sense, time travelers, but not in the liberating sense of exploring eras. Instead, we are bound across time, our hours parceled out and sold before we even live them. Credit collapses the distinction between now and later, until all time feels like it belongs to someone else. Take another pause. Close your eyes, and imagine your life stretched out before you. See the hours lined up like stepping stones across a river. Some of those stones are already marked, claimed by debt, colored by obligation. You have not yet stepped upon them, but they are not yours anymore. They belong to a lender, to an agreement, to a system that has reached forward into your future and marked its claim. How does that feel? Comforting, because it allows you to live today? Or unsettling, because it reveals how little of your future remains unbound? This is the deepest paradox of the credit spell. It feels like empowerment, and in some ways it is. It allows you to reach further, to grasp opportunities you would otherwise miss. But it also diminishes you, because it ties your identity to promises you must keep. You are no longer entirely free to choose, because your choices must now serve the obligations of the past. Credit, then, is not only about money. It is about identity, time, and freedom itself. And as the spell of credit continues to spread, its implications grow stranger. Nations borrow trillions, binding future generations to debts they did not choose. Corporations leverage credit to expand, to dominate, to shape markets in ways that ripple across the world. Families mortgage decades of earnings to own homes, to pay for education, to secure futures that may never arrive. Credit saturates everything until the line between possibility and obligation blurs completely. And here, the story naturally turns to the next step. If credit binds the future of individuals, what happens when debt stretches beyond one lifetime? What happens when obligations outlive those who created them, passing down like an inheritance of chains? This is where the spell deepens into something darker. The burden of debt across generations. From ancient times to today, societies have struggled with this haunting legacy, where the future is not only borrowed but inherited. where people are born already bound by promises they did not make. And so, from the credit spell, we drift now into the story of debt across generations, the next chapter in this long, unsettling tale of money's power over time. A debt across generations. It is one of the most haunting realities of money, because it reaches beyond the span of a single human life. Unlike a loan that you take out and repay within your years, generational debt extends its shadow across decades, sometimes centuries, binding children and grandchildren to promises they never made. It is unsettling to realize that you can be born into obligations, that the ledger of your life may already be inked before you take your first breath. Debt across generations is not just financial. It is historical, cultural, and deeply existential. It tells us that money does not only control the hours we live, but also the hours we have not yet lived, even the hours that belong to those who come after us. The significance of this concept lies in the way it collapses the illusion of individuality. We like to imagine that our financial lives begin with us, that when we grow up, find work, and earn money, we start fresh. But debt across generations reminds us that we are never just ourselves. We are the inheritors of choices made long before us. A nation that borrows today binds its future citizens. A family that takes out a mortgage passes its obligations to the children who will maintain the home. Even at the level of personal loans, student debt, medical debt, or business loans, these burdens can ripple outward, shaping the lives of loved ones and descendants. Money, through debt, becomes a river that flows not only through your life, but through the lives of those who follow. Take a moment to reflect on this. Imagine a child born into a family already carrying debt. Before the child can walk, before they can speak, the conditions of their life are already shaped by obligations. Maybe their parents' wages are tied up in repayments, leaving fewer resources for education, health, or joy. Maybe their future choices, what schools they attend, what careers they pursue, will be framed not only by their own desires, but by the debts their family carries. This is the weight of inherited debt, invisible, intangible, yet profoundly real. Historically, generational debt is nothing new. In ancient societies, families could be enslaved for unpaid obligations, with children born into servitude because of debts incurred by parents. In medieval Europe, entire lineages carried the financial consequences of failed ventures or unpaid taxes. Even nations are not immune. Wars are often fought with borrowed money, and the repayment of those debts becomes the burden of future generations who had no voice in the decision to fight. The American Revolution was funded by loans. So was World War II. Nations build prosperity in the present by borrowing against the labor of the unborn. And when those unborn come of age, they discover that part of their freedom has already been sold. The implications of this are staggering. Debt across generations reveals that money is not only about transactions in the present, but about obligations that stretch across time. It reveals that freedom is never absolute, because the choices of one generation become the limitations of the next. It forces us to see money not as a personal possession, but as a thread woven into the larger fabric of history. To inherit debt is to inherit not only numbers, but the consequences of choices, the weight of past ambitions, mistakes, or necessities. And yet, there is a contradiction here too. Debt can be a burden, but it can also be a bridge. A family may go into debt to send children to school, and those children may build lives of greater possibility because of it. A nation may borrow to invest in infrastructure, and future generations may reap the benefits. Debt across generations is not always a chain. Sometimes it is a ladder. The paradox lies in the uncertainty. You cannot know whether the debt you inherit will be a burden that drags you down or a foundation that lifts you higher. Pause here, and let this contradiction settle. Consider your own life. Which of your opportunities were made possible by debts taken before you were born? Which of your limitations are shaped by obligations passed down to you? The house you grew up in, the roads you traveled on, the schools you attended. Each of these may have been built on borrowed money. Each of these may have been funded by promises your parents or grandparents made on your behalf. Your life, in ways seen and unseen, has already been shaped by generational debt. This raises profound existential questions. If you inherit debt, how much of your life is truly your own? Are you free to shape your destiny, or are you bound by the promises of those who came before you? If your wages, your taxes, your hours are already claimed by debts that predate your choices, then freedom itself begins to look fragile, conditional, and compromised. Money, through the mechanism of debt, reveals that we are all more entangled in history than we like to admit. And yet, even as we reflect on this, we see the resilience of trust. Debt across generations endures because people continue to believe that promises will be honored, even long after the original signers have gone. A child born into debt is still expected to live within the terms of promises made before their birth. A nation honors its debts decades after the leaders who borrowed are gone. This continuity of belief is remarkable and unsettling. It means that trust is not only shared across people, but across time itself. Take another pause and breathe slowly. Imagine history not as a series of events, but as a chain of promises. Some fulfilled, some broken, but all binding. You are a link in that chain. The debts of the past flow through you, and the debts you incur may flow into others. You are not only yourself, you are a vessel of history's obligations. This realization challenges us to think about fairness. Is it just that a child should inherit debt they did not choose? Is it right that nations pass burdens across generations in the pursuit of prosperity or survival? These questions do not have simple answers, but they remind us that money, through debt, is not a neutral tool. It is a force that shapes lives across time, redistributing freedom and obligation in ways that no single individual can control. And here is where the story leads us naturally to its next step. Debt across generations shows us how trust and obligation move through time, binding us to the past. But there is another dimension of money that binds us to the present: trust in strangers. Every time you accept money from someone you do not know, every time you rely on a system that allows you to trade with those outside your circle, you are participating in another form of trust. One just as fragile, just as powerful as the trust that carries debt across generations. And so, from the inheritance of debt, we now drift into the realm of trust among strangers, the next chapter in this strange and haunting story of money's invisible power. Trust in strangers. It is one of the most astonishing and yet invisible achievements of money. It is so natural to us now that we rarely stop to see how strange it truly is. Every time you walk into a store and hand a cashier a bill, every time you send money to someone across the globe, every time you receive your salary in the form of digits on a screen, you are engaging in trust with people you do not know and may never meet again. The very existence of economies depends on this remarkable leap of faith. You believe that the person on the other side of the transaction will accept your money, and they believe that someone else, somewhere else, will also accept it from them. Without this trust, exchange would collapse into suspicion and barter. The fact that billions of strangers interact daily through money without even thinking about it is one of the most profound and eerie aspects of our shared human story. The significance of this is staggering. In small tribal societies, trade was rooted in familiarity, exchanges between kin, neighbors, or known allies. Trust was personal, grounded in relationships. But as societies grew, this was no longer enough. How could you trade with someone you had never met, someone who might live hundreds of miles away, someone whose language you didn't even speak? Money made this possible by creating a bridge of belief. It served as a universal translator, a silent promise that said, "You do not know me, but you know this symbol. And because you know this symbol, we can trust each other." This is the quiet miracle of money. It expands trust beyond relationships into the vastness of anonymity. Pause here and picture a bustling marketplace. The vendors call out, the goods are displayed, and people flow through the crowd, exchanging coins, notes, or swipes of a card. No one stops to question whether the other party will honor the transaction. No one pauses to verify each bill against its origin. The trust is automatic, systemic, invisible. And yet, if you pull back for a moment, you realize how astonishing it is that this works at all. A stranger hands you paper or digits, and you accept it as though it were nourishment itself. This is trust at its most abstract, and yet it is also trust at its most powerful because it underpins the entirety of modern life. Historically, this expansion of trust was revolutionary. The Silk Road connected traders across continents who never spoke the same language, never shared the same gods, never knew each other's names. And yet they exchanged silk for silver, spices for gold, porcelain for coins. The ability to trust strangers through money allowed empires to rise, economies to flourish, and cultures to intermingle. Without it, human societies would have remained fragmented, limited by the boundaries of personal trust. Money dissolved those boundaries and replaced them with a shared fiction that everyone could believe in. But there is a contradiction here, one that is quietly unsettling. Trust in strangers through money is not really about trusting the strangers themselves. It is about trusting the system that stands behind them. When you accept a banknote from someone you have never met, you are not trusting that person. You are trusting the government that issued the note, the institutions that protect its legitimacy, the collective agreement of society that continues to honor it. Money allows us to bypass personal trust and replace it with systemic trust. This is both powerful and dangerous. Powerful because it allows strangers to cooperate at scales unimaginable before. Dangerous because when the system falters, the trust collapses instantly. Take another pause and imagine a moment when trust in the system falters. Think of a time of hyperinflation, when money loses its value overnight. Suddenly, the notes that passed so smoothly from stranger to stranger are questioned. Every transaction becomes fraught. Suspicion replaces faith. The crowd in the marketplace does not flow, it stalls. Goods cannot be exchanged. The invisible fabric of trust tears, and society itself begins to unravel. This is how fragile trust in strangers truly is. It feels eternal until it cracks, and then its absence is catastrophic. The implications are vast. Trust in strangers through money has allowed humans to build global economies, to trade across oceans, to rely on supply chains that stretch around the world. When you sip coffee in the morning, you are trusting farmers in distant lands, shipping companies you've never heard of, ports and markets you've never seen, all of which are woven into the cup you hold. Your trust extends invisibly to strangers everywhere, and their trust extends back to you. In this sense, money has turned the world into a web of interdependence, binding billions together in a single system of belief. But this interdependence comes at a cost. It makes us vulnerable to forces far beyond our control. A financial crisis in one nation can ripple across the globe, shaking the trust of people who have no direct connection to its causes. A disruption in trade can cascade through invisible chains, leaving shelves empty thousands of miles away. Trust in strangers is the glue that holds it all together, but it is also the crack that can shatter everything at once. Pause once more and let this truth rest in your mind. Consider how strange it is that you live in a world sustained not by certainty, but by trust in people you will never meet. You eat because of strangers. You dress because of strangers. You live in houses built by strangers, paid for with money exchanged with strangers, all under the quiet assumption that the system works. It does until it doesn't. And when it doesn't, the fragility of our dependence on strangers is laid bare. This is why money is so paradoxical. It frees us from the limits of personal trust, but it also enslaves us to systems we cannot see or control. It allows us to expand our lives, but it also makes us dependent on the faith of billions we will never know. Trust in strangers is one of humanity's greatest achievements, but it is also one of our deepest vulnerabilities. And so the story flows forward. If trust in strangers reveals the fragile foundation of our daily lives, then the next layer of the illusion is the marketplace itself. For it is in the marketplace that these countless acts of trust converge, where strangers exchange not only goods, but also desires, hopes, and illusions. The marketplace looks solid, buzzing with life. But beneath its surface lies another mirage, an illusion of fairness, efficiency, and truth that often masks deeper contradictions. From trust in strangers, we now drift into the market mirage, where the theater of exchange reveals not only what we believe in, but also what we are willing to ignore. The market mirage. The marketplace appears to us as something solid, something objective, something that reflects reality with unshakable accuracy. Prices are posted, goods are displayed, and exchanges take place as though they are governed by the laws of nature themselves. We walk into a store, glance at the numbers on a tag, and assume that what we see is the truth. But what if the marketplace is not true at all? What if it is a mirage, an illusion of balance and fairness, a carefully staged theater where desire, scarcity, and value dance together in patterns that seem natural but are, in fact, constructed? The market gives the impression of being an impartial judge, but beneath its surface lies something far more subjective and human. Belief, manipulation, and trust woven into a fragile system that only works because we all agree to pretend that it is real. This concept is mind-bending because it cuts against the very grain of how most of us live our lives. We are taught to believe that the market is efficient, that supply and demand converge to produce fair outcomes, that prices tell the truth about what things are worth. Yet when you pause to consider it, you begin to notice cracks in this story. Why does a bottle of water cost almost nothing in one place and a small fortune in another? Why does the same medication cost pennies in one country and hundreds of dollars in another? Why do luxury brands sell simple cotton shirts for thousands of dollars, while identical shirts sell for a few dollars at a discount store? If the market reflects some absolute truth, then how do such contradictions exist? The market is not a mirror of reality. It is a mirage, a shimmering image that feels solid until you step closer, only to find that it shifts and dissolves before your eyes. The idea becomes clearer when we turn to history. Consider the Dutch tulip mania of the 17th century. Tulips, once exotic, became symbols of wealth and prestige. Their prices soared beyond reason, with a single bulb selling for more than a house. And then, just as quickly, the prices collapsed, leaving fortunes ruined. What changed? The flowers were the same. The soil that nurtured them was the same. What changed was belief. The market had created an illusion of value, and when that illusion evaporated, so too did the wealth. This story is not a relic of the past. It is a recurring truth of markets everywhere. From the dot-com bubble to the housing crisis, the market shows us again and again that what seems solid is often nothing more than a collective hallucination. Think of how advertisements contribute to this mirage. A bottle of perfume is not just scented liquid. It is romance, elegance, or power captured in a glass container. A pair of sneakers is not just stitched fabric and rubber. It is speed, style, and belonging. The market wraps goods in layers of meaning that are intangible, but which become inseparable from the objects themselves. When you pay for the item, you are not only paying for the thing, you are paying for the illusion that surrounds it. This is why two identical items can be priced so differently. One carries the aura of a brand, while the other does not. The market does not simply reflect value. It manufactures it, like a magician conjuring something out of nothing. Pause for a moment here. Reflect on the last thing you purchased. Did you buy it for its raw material and function, or did you buy it for what it represented to you? Did you pay for food, or did you pay for the comfort of a brand you trust? Did you pay for clothes, or did you pay for the status of a label sewn discreetly into the fabric? The mirage of the market is that it convinces us these layers of meaning are natural, that they belong to the object itself, when in truth they are projected onto it by human imagination and reinforced by money. The implications of this are both fascinating and unsettling. If the market is a mirage, then it means much of what we consider real is in fact imaginary. Value is not an inherent property of objects. It is a story we tell about them. And yet these stories have immense power. They shape economies, alter lives, and decide who prospers and who suffers. Entire industries rise and fall not on the basis of physical reality, but on the strength of shared illusions. Cryptocurrencies, for example, thrive not because they are tangible, but because enough people believe in their promise. When belief wavers, their value plummets. The mirage does not vanish, it simply changes shape. But there is also a deeper paradox here. Though the market is a mirage, it produces very real consequences. A luxury brand may sell the illusion of exclusivity, but the money it collects buys real mansions, real power, and real influence. A speculative bubble may be built on sand, but when it bursts, the pain is solid, the losses undeniable. The illusion is intangible, but the consequences are not. This is the cruel beauty of the market. It operates on dreams and desires, yet its effects cut into the material world with precision. Take another moment to let this sink in. The chair you sit on, the food you eat, the technology you use. All of it was shaped not only by practical needs, but by the shifting illusions of the marketplace. You are surrounded by objects that are both real and unreal at the same time. Wood and fabric, silicon and glass, fused with layers of meaning that exist only in the collective imagination. The market is not simply where goods are exchanged. It is where reality itself is blurred, where symbols masquerade as truth, and where illusion becomes law. This raises profound questions about human freedom. If the marketplace is a mirage, then how free are we in the choices we make within it? We believe we are choosing based on personal preference, but much of that preference has been sculpted by advertising, branding, and the artificial scarcity of the market itself. What appears as freedom of choice may, in fact, be the gentle herding of consumers through a desert of illusions. We walk through the marketplace, believing we are guided by our own will, but in reality, the shimmering visions that surround us guide our steps. And yet, without the mirage, the system could not function. If value were reduced to raw material and labor alone, the vast complexity of modern economies would collapse. The mirage is not a flaw, it is the foundation. We believe in it, not because we are deceived, but because we must. To question it too deeply is to risk unraveling the fabric of exchange that sustains us. And so we carry on, knowing and not knowing at the same time, living within illusions we ourselves maintain. As we drift onward, it is worth noticing that the mirage does not stop with goods or markets. It extends further into symbols that float above the marketplace itself, casting halos that blind us to deeper truths. If the market mirage shows us how illusion shapes value, then the next step reveals how illusion shapes identity. Brands, with their glowing promises and seductive images, do more than create mirages of products. They create mirages of self. This is where the story leads us next, into the realm of the brand halo, where belief and identity intertwine until we can no longer tell where we end and the illusion begins. The brand halo. The halo of a brand is one of the most subtle, yet powerful illusions money has ever created. Unlike the tangible weight of gold or the physical presence of paper notes, the brand halo lives entirely in the mind. It floats above products like an aura, invisible yet undeniably present, shaping how we see, what we desire, and even how we define ourselves. A pair of shoes is just leather and fabric until a swoosh is stitched on its side. A handbag is simply stitched fabric until it bears the insignia of a luxury house. A cup of coffee is hot water infused with roasted beans until it comes in a cup with a green mermaid logo. The transformation is not physical, but symbolic, and yet it is profound. The brand halo makes the ordinary feel extraordinary, convincing us to pay more, desire more, and value more for something that, at its core, remains materially the same. This concept is significant because it reveals just how deep the illusions of money penetrate. It is not just that markets are mirages. It is that those mirages extend into identity and meaning. Brands do not merely sell products. They sell stories, lifestyles, and emotions. They tap into the most intimate parts of our psychology, offering not just goods, but belonging, prestige, or self-expression. To buy a product under a famous brand is to purchase a little piece of its aura. When someone wears a logo across their chest, they are not advertising the shirt. They are advertising themselves as part of a story, a myth, a group that transcends the fabric they wear. The brand halo turns consumption into participation in a shared illusion, one so powerful that it feels more real than the objects themselves. Consider how this works in practice. A bottle of perfume contains chemicals designed to create a pleasant scent. But why do some perfumes sell for 10 times, even 100 times more than others? The answer lies not in the liquid but in the halo, the story of sophistication, allure, and elegance that surrounds it. The luxury watch industry offers another example. A watch costing thousands of dollars tells time no better than one sold for a fraction of the price. But the halo of heritage, exclusivity, and craftsmanship convinces buyers they are not merely purchasing a tool, but an heirloom, a statement of worth, a marker of success. In truth, what they are buying is the glow of the brand, an invisible aura that clings to the product and radiates through them as its owner. Pause for a moment to reflect on your own life. Think about the brands you have gravitated toward, perhaps unconsciously. Do you own a phone, not because it functions better than all others, but because it carries the glow of innovation, sleekness, or status? Do you favor certain shoes not only for comfort, but because they project identity, tribe, or aspiration? The brand halo seeps into us quietly, embedding itself in our decisions until we mistake its aura for reality. In this way, money does not simply purchase objects, it purchases symbols, and those symbols, once accepted, alter who we believe ourselves to be. The implications of this are vast. Brands have become more than economic entities. They are cultural icons. They shape the stories societies tell about success, beauty, power, and belonging. When children grow up aspiring to wear certain logos, when adults measure themselves by what brands they can afford, it reveals that the halo has penetrated deeply into our sense of self-worth. The brand halo also creates hierarchy. Some logos shine brighter than others, and those who can afford them stand higher in the invisible ranking of prestige. This creates a strange paradox. Value is not in the object itself, but in the way society collectively agrees to see it. Two identical shirts, one bearing a famous logo and one unmarked, exist in the same physical reality but entirely different symbolic worlds. And yet, the halo is fragile. Strip away the branding, and the aura collapses. Imagine luxury handbags without their insignias, shoes without their logos, watches without their names. Would they still command the same desire, the same devotion, the same price? The answer is almost certainly no. The halo depends on belief. It is a spell cast by marketing, tradition, and social validation, and it requires constant reinforcement. Advertisements, celebrity endorsements, carefully designed stores, all serve to polish the halo so that it continues to shine. Without belief, the glow dims. Without belief, the object reverts to being just what it was: fabric, leather, metal, chemicals. This contradiction reveals something profound about money and identity. We often think of ourselves as unique individuals, free in our choices, defined by our inner qualities. But the brand halo shows us that much of what we consider our identity is stitched together with logos, labels, and symbols we did not create. We wear them like armor, like masks, like signals to others about who we are. In this sense, our identities are not purely ours. They are co-authored by the brands we consume and the illusions we participate in. The brand halo reveals that money controls not just our possessions, but the very image of ourselves that we present to the world. Take a pause and let this thought settle. The next time you see someone walking down the street, look closely at the symbols they wear. The sneakers, the phone, the bag, the car. They are all glowing faintly with halos, invisible lights of meaning that beam outward into the world. And notice, too, how others react to those halos. Admiration, envy, recognition. The glow does not exist in the object. It exists in the shared imagination, in the belief that gives it life. In this way, We are all participants in a vast, unspoken ritual of branding, one that we reinforce each time we buy, admire, or aspire. The contradictions deepen when we recognize that the brand halo also has the power to deceive. A brand can sell the illusion of ethics, sustainability, or social responsibility, while masking exploitation, pollution, or greed. The halo blinds us, making us feel that by buying, we are aligning with goodness, even when the underlying reality tells a different story. This is perhaps the most dangerous aspect of the halo. It not only shapes desire, but also shapes morality. It convinces us that virtue can be purchased, that by consuming the right brand, we are not only stylish but good, not only wealthy but wise. In this sense, the halo is not just aesthetic, it is ideological. It molds not just what we want, but what we believe is right. And so the brand halo shows us something both astonishing and unsettling. Our identities, our values, and our moral compasses are vulnerable to being shaped by money's invisible glow. We think we own our choices, but often our choices own us, because they are guided by stories we did not write, illusions we did not create, and symbols we did not question. To recognize this is not necessarily to escape it, but it is to see the water we swim in, the light we live under. From here, the path flows naturally toward another layer of the illusion. If the brand halo reveals how symbols shape our identities, then the next truth reveals how those identities are held together by the rules we collectively accept. For without rules, neither brands nor markets could survive. Trust in rules, in laws, in invisible structures, is what ensures that the halos continue to glow, that the mirages continue to shimmer, and that the entire system of money remains intact. And so, as we drift onward, we move from the shimmering aura of the brand halo into the deeper framework of trust in rules, where the very architecture of belief reveals itself. Trust in rules. Trust in rules is perhaps the quietest foundation of money, and yet it may also be the most essential. Without rules, the entire edifice of value would collapse because no matter how much faith we place in gold paper brands or banks, all of these depend on an invisible architecture of laws and agreements that bind strangers into cooperation. Rules are the frame upon which money stretches its skin, the silent scaffolding that holds up the entire illusion. When you accept a banknote, it is not simply because you trust the stranger handing it to you, nor even the government that printed it. It is because you trust the rules that define what that note is, how it must be accepted, and the consequences if someone refuses it. Rules turn belief into order, and order into stability. Without them, money would dissolve back into chaos. This concept is deeply significant because it reveals something mind-bending. The rules themselves are invisible, yet their effects are more real than almost anything else in your daily life. You cannot touch the law that says a piece of paper is legal tender, but it governs how you live. You cannot hold in your hand the regulations that require banks to protect your deposits, but you live as if they are solid walls. You cannot see the rules that guarantee your employer must pay you in recognized currency, but your life depends on them being enforced. The fact that these unseen structures dictate so much of existence is a reminder that what feels natural in money is, at its heart, an artificial creation sustained by shared obedience to abstract codes. The story of rules in money is long and winding. Ancient civilizations carved their codes into stone tablets and declared punishments for those who refused accepted forms of currency. Medieval kings stamped their seals on coins and decreed their use under threat of penalty. Modern governments pass laws that make refusal of official money illegal, binding the act of exchange into the body of the state itself. Even the global financial system relies on an intricate web of international agreements, regulatory frameworks, and oversight bodies. None of this is visible to you when you swipe a card or receive your paycheck, but without it, the transaction would be meaningless. What seems like a simple gesture, a transfer of digits on a screen, is in truth the outcome of vast systems of law, enforcement, and compliance that ensure both sides trust the outcome. Pause for a moment and reflect on this invisible scaffolding. Every store you walk into accepts your money, not because of goodwill, but because rules require it. Every paycheck you receive is deposited into your account, not by the generosity of your employer, but by the framework of contracts, labor laws, and regulations that force consistency. The rules hover above every transaction like an unseen referee, ensuring the game continues, ensuring belief does not waver. Without rules, money would be no more reliable than a promise whispered in the dark. The implications of this are striking. On the one hand, rules empower trust. They allow billions of strangers to coordinate, confident that there is an invisible structure binding them together. On the other hand, rules reveal just how fragile this system can be. If the rules are corrupted, ignored, or unenforced, the trust collapses almost instantly. History offers sobering lessons. In times of war, governments have suspended rules, printed endless currency, and undermined their own systems. In times of crisis, black markets emerge where rules cannot penetrate, and suddenly trust fractures into local networks of barter and shadow currencies. The stability of money, which feels eternal in daily life, is only as strong as the rules that protect it. This paradox cuts deeper when we realize that rules themselves are human inventions. They are written, debated, enforced, and sometimes broken. They are not divine nor eternal, but fragile agreements that only endure because enough people accept them. This means that the foundation of money rests not only on belief in its symbols, but also on belief in the fairness and enforcement of rules. When rules are perceived as unjust or arbitrary, the illusion wavers. Citizens lose faith, institutions crumble, and the very system of money begins to falter. It is not enough for rules to exist. They must be trusted as legitimate, or they serve no purpose at all. Consider the subtlety of this. A coin stamped by a king carried value because the rules of the kingdom enforced it. But the moment that king lost power, the coin's magic evaporated. A banknote is worth something only as long as the government behind it is stable. The rules breathe life into the symbols, and without them, the symbols are lifeless objects. In this way, rules and belief are inseparable. Rules create the conditions for belief, and belief gives rules their force. Take another pause. Imagine standing in a crowded marketplace where rules have suddenly broken down. No enforcement, no law, no shared structure. Would you trust the paper in your wallet? Would you trade your goods for it? Or would you retreat suspicious, clinging to what is tangible and certain? This thought experiment reveals just how dependent we are on invisible structures. Rules are the unseen walls of the house we live in. We do not notice them until they collapse, and by then, it may be too late. The contradictions here are haunting. We think of money as freedom, but that freedom is entirely conditional upon obedience to rules. We think of exchange as natural, but it is orchestrated by law. We think of wealth as individual, but it is supported by collective enforcement. Money is not a free-floating entity. It is a prisoner of codes, decrees, and contracts that define its every move. And yet, it is precisely this captivity that makes it useful, because without structure, it would disintegrate into chaos. Money exists in the paradox of rules, constrained yet powerful, fragile yet foundational. As you let this truth settle, you may begin to see the eerie beauty of it. The next time you hand someone a bill, remember that it is not just paper. It is a small fragment of law, a piece of invisible architecture, a symbol backed not only by belief, but by rules that stretch across nations, centuries, and civilizations. You are holding in your hand not just an object, but an agreement written into the very fabric of society. From here, the path naturally bends toward the forces that shake these rules most deeply. For if trust in rules gives stability, then the greatest fear is what happens when those rules are stretched too far. Inflation, that quiet erosion of value, is one of the most terrifying ways trust in rules begins to fray. It is not sudden collapse, but slow decay, eating at the faith that money will hold its worth. And so, as we drift onward, we leave behind the invisible scaffolding of rules and step into the trembling uncertainty of the inflation fear, where the ground beneath money begins to quiver and the illusion itself is tested. The inflation fear. Inflation is one of those invisible forces that most people feel before they fully understand it. It creeps quietly into daily life, reshaping the meaning of money in ways that are both subtle and terrifying. You notice it when the loaf of bread you buy every week costs more than it did last month, or when the rent you thought was stable rises without warning, or when your savings, once a cushion, begin to feel thinner, even though the number in your account has not changed. Inflation is not a sudden theft, but a slow erosion, a tide that eats away at the shoreline of your purchasing power, one grain of sand at a time. What makes this concept so significant is not just the practical discomfort it creates, but the existential questions it raises. If money itself is losing value, then what exactly are we clinging to when we work, save, and plan for the future? To understand inflation is to step into a paradox. On the surface, it seems simple. When prices rise, money buys less. But underneath, it is far more complex, because money is not just an object. It is a promise, a belief in stability. Inflation shakes that belief. It reveals that the value of money is not fixed, but floating, shifting according to forces far beyond the control of ordinary people. Governments print more money, demand surges, supply chains falter, or crises erupt, and suddenly the paper or digits you rely on become less potent. What you thought was solid reveals itself to be air. This is why inflation is more than an economic phenomenon. It is a psychological one. It gnaws at the trust that makes money work at all. Consider the historical echoes. In Weimar Germany during the 1920s, inflation reached absurd levels. Families would wheel carts of banknotes to buy bread, only to find that by the time they reached the store, the price had doubled again. Children played with stacks of currency as if they were building blocks, because the paper itself was worth less than the toys it could buy. In Zimbabwe in the 2000s, the government printed bills worth trillions, but they could not buy even the simplest necessities. In both cases, the horror was not just that money lost its value, but that the rules people had trusted, the stability of their economies, collapsed in slow motion. Inflation was not just an economic disruption, it was a betrayal of the belief that money was reliable, that work would be rewarded, that savings could provide security. Pause here and reflect on how unsettling this is. Money is already an abstraction, and inflation makes that abstraction tremble. It exposes that the numbers we cling to, our wages, our savings, our investments, are only meaningful if they hold their relationship to goods and services. Without that relationship, the numbers are empty symbols. Inflation reveals the fragility of the entire system by showing that even if money itself multiplies, its power can vanish. It challenges the comforting illusion that wealth is about accumulation, when in truth it is about preservation against decay. The implications ripple into daily choices. People living under the shadow of inflation behave differently. They rush to spend, fearing that waiting will only make things more expensive. They turn to physical assets, land, gold, or even canned goods, because these feel more stable than paper promises. They lose faith in saving, because saving feels like pouring water into a leaking jar. And with every shift in behavior, inflation reinforces itself, because when everyone spends quickly, demand surges, prices rise further, and the cycle accelerates. Inflation is not just an external pressure, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And yet inflation is not always catastrophic. Moderate inflation is considered normal, even healthy, in modern economies. Economists argue that a small, steady rise in prices encourages growth, prevents stagnation, and incentivizes investment. But even this reveals a strange contradiction. It means that the value of your money is designed to erode over time, little by little, like a candle burning steadily down to its base. To live in such a system is to accept that your hours of labor, once stored as money, will inevitably weaken with age. Inflation is not just an accident. It is often a deliberate feature, a hidden tax on your time. This makes it a deeply unsettling reality, because it transforms money from a container of value into a sieve that slowly leaks. Take another pause and think of your own hours. Imagine the day you worked hard, saved part of your paycheck, and set it aside for the future. Imagine coming back to that sum a decade later, only to find that it buys less, does less, secures less. The hours you gave up, the energy you spent, the life you traded for that sum, some of it has vanished into thin air. Inflation makes us realize that time stored as money is not time preserved, but time diminished. It is like pressing flowers in a book only to discover that the petals crumble when you open it again. Inflation also reshapes society. It widens inequalities because those with access to assets that rise with inflation, real estate, stocks, commodities, can shield themselves, while those dependent on wages or savings cannot. It punishes the poor disproportionately because they live closer to the edge of survival, where rising costs hit hardest. It destabilizes trust between generations, as the promises of pensions, savings accounts, and inheritances erode before they can be fulfilled. Inflation in this way is not just an economic trend, but a force that rewrites the contracts of fairness and stability that societies depend upon. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of inflation is its invisibility. It rarely arrives with a bang. Instead, it drifts into life quietly, almost unnoticed, like a thief slipping through a window at night. Only after it has taken enough do people realize something is gone. It forces us to live with unease, because we never quite know whether the value of our money is secure or already slipping away. Inflation teaches us that permanence is an illusion, that what feels fixed is always shifting, and that even the bedrock of currency is sand in disguise. And so, as we step forward, the question becomes, if inflation erodes faith in traditional money, where do people turn? In recent years, many have turned to the uncharted world of digital currencies, placing their hopes in something new, something decentralized, something seemingly immune to the slow decay of inflation. But here too, the paradox remains. For if inflation is the fear of old money, then cryptocurrencies are the gamble of new money. And so the path carries us onward, from the slow erosion of value into the risky experiment of the crypto gamble, where belief and uncertainty collide in a theater of possibility. The crypto gamble. The rise of cryptocurrency is one of the most fascinating financial experiments of our age, and one of the most revealing mirrors of humanity as endless search for stability in a world of uncertainty. It is significant because it shows us once again that money is not about metal, paper, or digits. It is about belief. At its core, cryptocurrency is nothing more than lines of code, encrypted data, digital scarcity, artificially created by mathematical puzzles. And yet, billions of dollars, hours of labor, and futures of entire generations have been tied to it. Why? Because people chose to believe. Because in a time when inflation gnaws at traditional currencies and trust in institutions falters, the promise of a new, decentralized form of money glows like a beacon. The crypto gamble is the story of how we place our faith not in kings or governments, but in algorithms, in communities, and in the dream that a system no one owns might be more trustworthy than a system controlled by everyone in power. At first glance, the allure is simple. Traditional money is backed by governments, regulated by central banks, and manipulated by policies ordinary people cannot influence. Crypto claims to change that. It offers independence, transparency, and scarcity enforced not by decree, but by math. Each coin is finite, every transaction recorded on an immutable ledger called the blockchain, and no single authority can step in to alter its rules. For many, this feels like liberation, a way to take control of money itself, to escape the slow erosion of inflation or the arbitrary actions of governments. The idea is radical. What if trust could be placed not in human systems, prone to corruption and decay, but in code? Yet beneath the glow of this vision lies its paradox. Crypto is both liberation and gamble, both freedom and risk. It is liberation because it breaks the chains of traditional authority. But it is a gamble because its value is built on nothing more than belief. Unlike gold, it has no intrinsic use. Unlike governments, it has no armies or laws to enforce it. Its scarcity is artificial, its value floating entirely on collective trust. And trust, as history has shown, is fragile. The same belief that can make a coin skyrocket in value can make it collapse overnight. This is why the world of crypto is haunted by volatility, with fortunes made and lost in the blink of an eye. Pause for a moment and reflect on this duality. Imagine someone who buys a digital coin at its peak, believing it to be the future, only to watch it lose half its value within weeks. Did the coin itself change? No. The code remained the same. The ledger remained unbroken. What changed was the collective mood, the shifting tides of belief. Crypto lays bare the truth that all money shares. Value is not in the object, but in the story we tell about it. But with crypto, the story is written at hyperspeed, its highs and lows compressed into dizzying cycles of hope and despair. This volatility reveals another unsettling layer, the casino-like nature of the crypto world. Many are drawn not by its philosophical promise of decentralized freedom, but by the allure of quick profit. It is a stage where speculation, greed, and fear dance together under the flashing lights of possibility. Entire communities rise around coins and tokens, chanting their beliefs like prayers, building cult-like identities around symbols that exist only as code. In these moments, crypto feels less like finance and more like myth, less like currency and more like faith. The gamble is not just economic, it is existential. Historically, humans have always chased such experiments. From shells to stones, gold to paper, bonds to stocks, we have tested new ways of storing and exchanging value, often with both triumph and ruin. Crypto is simply the latest chapter, though magnified by the digital age. Its significance lies in the way it forces us to confront the very question: what makes money real? Is it the authority of governments, the weight of metal, the scarcity of code, or the faith of millions? Each answer reveals as much about us as it does about money. The implications ripple outward. If crypto succeeds, it could transform the architecture of finance, breaking monopolies of power and reshaping trust. If it fails, it will be remembered as one of history's grand illusions, a speculative fever that consumed vast resources and left little behind. Either way, it has already changed how we think. It has revealed that money need not be physical, that trust can be programmed, that belief can be anchored not in kings or banks, but in networks of strangers connected only by code. Pause here and breathe. Consider how strange it is that people around the world sit in front of glowing screens, watching numbers rise and fall, staking their futures on coins that cannot be held, touched, or seen. Consider how these same coins can buy cars, houses, or even lives of comfort, provided others agree to their worth. And consider how quickly this could vanish if belief wavers. This is the essence of the gamble. Liberation on one side, collapse on the other, with nothing but faith bridging the two. And yet, the crypto gamble also whispers a deeper truth. It shows us that money has always been this way. Every currency, every coin, every banknote has been a gamble on belief, a bet that others will accept it tomorrow. Crypto is simply a mirror, reflecting back at us the fragility and wonder of the systems we already live within. It strips away the illusion of permanence and reminds us that all money is, at heart, a story we tell together. From here, the narrative darkens. For while crypto is a gamble of faith in code, history reminds us of the far greater gambles that unfold when belief in money itself collapses. When rules falter, when inflation spirals, when trust evaporates, societies face not just economic decline but existential rupture. War and collapse become the crucibles where money's illusions are tested most brutally. And so, as we drift onward, we leave behind the shimmering glow of the crypto gamble and step into the shadow of history, its most terrifying teacher, the way money unravels in times of war and collapse. War and collapse. War and collapse are the ultimate tests of money, the crucibles where its illusions are burned away and its fragility is laid bare. In times of peace and stability, money feels eternal, unquestionable, a natural law of existence. But when nations fall into conflict or societies fracture under the weight of crisis, the spell is broken. Suddenly, the paper in your wallet loses its power, the numbers in your account mean nothing, and the trust that once bound millions together dissolves into dust. War and collapse strip money back to its essence, not a thing, not an object, but a shared story, one that can unravel the moment belief falters. This makes the concept profoundly significant, because it reveals how dependent human life is on an invisible agreement, and how quickly that agreement can fail when chaos arrives. To understand the fragility of money in times of war, imagine a village where a loaf of bread costs 1 coin today and 10 coins tomorrow. The baker does not change the recipe, the oven remains the same, the flour is unchanged, but the value of the coin has disintegrated under the weight of uncertainty. In wartime economies, this is common. Governments, desperate to fund armies and sustain production, print endless amounts of money, hoping to stretch belief beyond its natural limits. Inflation becomes hyperinflation, and the people who once trusted paper as life itself begin to discard it in despair. There are stories of German children in the 1920s using bundles of marks as building blocks of families in Yugoslavia, lighting fires with their worthless dinars of citizens in collapsing states, fleeing with gold cigarettes or foreign currency because their own had become nothing more than ash. Collapse adds another dimension. In the ruins of economies, money does not just lose value, it loses meaning. In Venezuela's crisis, wages paid in bolivars could not keep pace with inflation, leaving workers paid in food rations instead. In Argentina, cycles of collapse eroded trust so deeply that people began hoarding dollars rather than their own national currency, living in a dual economy where official money was seen as a joke. In every case, collapse exposes that money's power is conditional. It only works when the system behind it is strong enough to enforce belief. Remove that system, and money becomes scrap paper, empty digits, or hollow metal. Pause for a moment and let that sink in. Think of the objects around you, your wallet, your bank card, the digits in your phone app. Imagine waking up tomorrow to find that none of it works anymore, that your card is declined not because of insufficient funds, but because the system itself has crumbled. Imagine holding a stack of bills and finding they buy nothing, that people laugh at them, that shopkeepers refuse them, that you are forced to barter with neighbors for food or safety. This is the shadow that war and collapse cast. They remind us that money is not real in itself, but a delicate trust that can be broken in an instant. The implications are haunting. Money is often thought of as the ultimate store of value, the safest way to carry one's labor into the future. But war and collapse reveal that money is not a store of value. It is a store of belief, and belief can vanish when survival is at stake. In those moments, people revert to older forms of value: food, fuel, medicine, tools, even bullets. What was once considered primitive barter becomes the new economy, because barter rests on direct need rather than fragile abstractions. In this way, collapse is not just a breakdown of systems, but a return to something raw, something closer to the bones of survival. This creates a paradox that is both fascinating and terrifying. Money is at once our most advanced invention, the pinnacle of collective trust, and our most fragile creation, undone by the very forces it was meant to withstand. War, with its destruction of infrastructure, trade, and stability, exposes this fragility most ruthlessly. Collapse, with its erosion of trust, extends the wound into daily life. And yet, in both, we see human adaptability. People find ways to trade, to invent new currencies, to rebuild trust in smaller circles. Cigarettes became currency in prisoner of war camps. Bottles of vodka became money in collapsing Soviet economies. Even during the darkest moments, belief reshapes itself, proving that money may vanish, but the human need for exchange never does. Take a breath here. Reflect on the fragility of your own trust. How much of your life rests on the assumption that money will hold its meaning tomorrow? Your savings, your salary, your plans for the future, all of them depend on the system remaining intact. And yet, history shows that collapse can happen anywhere, at any time, turning certainty into illusion. This is why war and collapse are such powerful reminders. They teach us that money is not a fortress, but a fragile bridge, and that when the river of history floods, the bridge may break. The contradictions extend further. War and collapse often lead to the invention of new currencies, new systems, new agreements. Out of destruction comes reinvention. But this reinvention carries scars, because the memory of collapse lingers. People who lived through hyperinflation or wartime economies often carry a deep mistrust of money for the rest of their lives. They save differently, spend differently, value differently. Collapse leaves a psychological mark as much as an economic one, reminding us that money is not eternal, that it can betray us when we need it most. And so, the story of war and collapse leads us naturally into the next layer of illusion, the invisible contract that underlies money itself. For what makes money function in times of peace is not its material, nor its rules, nor its halos, but the unspoken agreement between all of us that it matters. War and collapse reveal how fragile that contract is, how easily it can be torn apart. But in the quiet after the storm, societies always rebuild it, because without it, life cannot continue. And so we move onward, from the brutal lesson of collapse into the subtle mystery of the invisible contract, the silent pact that binds billions of strangers into a single system of belief. The invisible contract. The invisible contract is perhaps the most mysterious yet foundational aspect of money, the silent agreement that binds together billions of people across space and time. Unlike written laws or stamped coins, this contract is not recorded in any book or signed by any hand. It has no official parchment, no seal of authority, no courtroom where it can be defended. And yet, it governs your life more completely than almost any other agreement you will ever make. It is the unspoken pact that when you hand someone a slip of paper or a swipe of a card or a string of digital numbers, they will accept it as real, as valuable, as a fair exchange for something tangible in return. This invisible contract is what allows strangers to trust one another, what allows economies to expand beyond local barter, and what keeps the delicate machinery of commerce humming even when no one is looking. Its significance is mind-bending because it reminds us that money is not, and never has been, about the material objects we use to represent it. Gold, silver, shells, paper, or code. These are all costumes worn by the same invisible actor. The real essence of money is the contract, the agreement, the shared belief that what we trade carries meaning. Without this invisible contract, no amount of gold would matter, no pile of paper would carry weight, no blockchain would convince anyone. It is this unseen thread of trust that makes markets possible, that allows wages to mean survival, that lets the labor of your past be carried forward into your future. And yet, because it is invisible, we rarely notice it. We live inside it like fish in water, blind to the very medium that sustains us. To break this down further, think of the simplest everyday exchange. You walk into a store and pick up a loaf of bread. You bring it to the counter, hand over a few notes or swipe your card, and walk away with your food. At no point do you pause to consider whether the baker will accept your money. At no point do you question whether the cardist numbers mean anything beyond glowing pixels on a screen. You trust automatically that the baker will honor the invisible contract, because you know that when the baker turns to their suppliers, they too will honor it. This chain of invisible agreements stretches outward, linking farmers to millers, truck drivers to shopkeepers, bankers to workers, until it forms a vast, unbroken web. Each act of trust reinforces the contract, and the contract in turn sustains the trust. Historically, this invisible contract has been tested again and again. In times of collapse, like the fall of Rome or the crises of modern hyperinflation, it was not the metal of coins or the ink on paper that failed. It was the contract. When soldiers refused to pay and debased currency, when citizens lost faith in rulers, when merchants turned away from official notes, the contract was broken and economies crumbled. Conversely, when new systems of belief were forged, whether through central banks, international trade agreements, or digital networks, the contract was renewed and life continued. What this shows us is that the invisible contract is both fragile and resilient. It can be broken in an instant, yet it can also be rebuilt, as long as people find a reason to believe again. Pause here and reflect on how strange this truly is. Every object of value in your life, your house, your car, your savings account, rests on the invisible contract. The house is not simply yours because you live in it, but because others agree to honor your ownership as defined by money and law. The car in your driveway is not simply yours because you drive it, but because you exchanged money under the invisible agreement that makes the exchange real. Even your savings account is not simply a number. It is a claim written into the invisible fabric of society, a contract that others will recognize tomorrow. Without this contract, ownership itself would vanish. You would hold objects, yes, but not value. The implications are profound. The invisible contract challenges the very way we think about freedom, independence, and security. We like to imagine ourselves as self-reliant individuals, masters of our own destiny. But the truth is that our survival depends on billions of strangers we will never meet, all of whom silently honor the same contract. Your groceries arrive at the store because of countless transactions between people you do not know. Your electricity flows because invisible contracts link producers, distributors, and consumers in an unbroken chain. Your wages appear because employers, banks, and governments all recognize and honor the contract. You are not self-sufficient. You are embedded in an invisible web of trust, a web that only functions because everyone continues to play along. And yet, here lies the paradox. The contract is invisible, unspoken, and unenforceable without belief. Unlike a written law, it cannot be imposed at gunpoint. A government can demand that its money be used. But if people lose faith, they will turn to barter, to foreign currencies, to cigarettes, to gold. The invisible contract cannot be forced. It can only be sustained by trust. This makes it at once the strongest and weakest foundation imaginable. Strong, because it binds billions of people without them even realizing it. Weak, because it can evaporate the moment belief falters. Take a moment to let that contradiction settle. Consider how every paycheck, every bill, every savings plan you hold is really just a fragment of this invisible agreement. Consider how strange it is that you devote your hours, your labor, your energy to earning numbers that only hold meaning because everyone else agrees to honor them. Consider how much of your life has been built on something you cannot see, touch, or prove, only believe. This realization is both eerie and calming. Eerie because it reveals how fragile the structures of modern life really are. Calming because it shows that despite its invisibility, the contract has endured through wars, collapses, crises, and revolutions. Humanity has always found a way to rebuild it, to renew the pact, to restore belief. Perhaps the invisible contract is not simply an illusion, but one of the deepest truths of human cooperation. That we survive not because we stand alone, but because we agree together. And so, as we continue, the question naturally emerges. If the invisible contract is what binds us in the present, then what sustains us into the future? What makes us believe that tomorrow, next year, or even decades from now, money will still hold its power? The answer lies not only in rules or systems, but in something even more fragile, even more astonishing: faith in the future. For money is not only a claim on the present, it is a promise about what has yet to come. And so we drift onward, from the invisible contract of today, into the boundless horizon of tomorrow, where faith in the future becomes the currency that sustains all others. Faith in the future. Faith in the future is the quiet pulse that animates money, the silent force that keeps the system alive even when all else feels uncertain. Every coin in your pocket, every digit in your account, every piece of paper passed from hand to hand is not merely a representation of present value. It is a promise that tomorrow it will still mean something. Without this faith, money collapses into nothing more than scraps of paper and flickers of code. The significance of this truth is staggering. It means that money is not only a reflection of what we have done in the past, nor just an agreement of the present, but a collective bet on the future. It is a shared leap of belief that tomorrow will come, that tomorrow will honor the same contracts, that tomorrow will still recognize the same symbols. Without this forward-facing trust, economies could not function, societies could not build, and individuals could not plan beyond the moment they stand in. The depth of this idea becomes clearer when you think of what happens every time you save. When you put money into a bank account, tuck it into an envelope, or invest it in some future return, you are not simply storing numbers. You are storing belief. You are telling yourself that weeks, months, or years from now, that money will still be valuable, still be honored, still be exchangeable for the goods and comforts you hope for. This is faith in its purest form. Faith that tomorrow will resemble today closely enough for your choices to matter. To hold money is to extend your hand into the future, to tether your present labor to a reality that has not yet arrived. Pause for a moment and notice how strange this really is. You cannot guarantee the future. You cannot know whether economies will rise or fall, whether currencies will hold or collapse, whether the rules of society will endure. And yet, you act as though you do know, as though saving money is a natural way to secure what lies ahead. Faith in the future makes this illusion possible. It keeps people working, saving, and investing, even though the future is always uncertain. It is not the coins that bind us, nor the digits, nor the laws. It is the belief that tomorrow will still honor today's promises. Historically, this faith has been both the strength and weakness of societies. During stable times, it allowed nations to grow, to build monumental projects, to invest in generations yet unborn. Cathedrals took centuries to complete, funded by money and labor that spanned multiple lifetimes. Railroads were built under the assumption that the debts taken today would be honored decades later by people not yet born. Faith in the future was the invisible foundation of these achievements. And yet, in times of collapse, this faith has withered, and with it, the entire fabric of money. When people no longer believe tomorrow will honor today's contracts, they stop saving, stop investing, stop trusting. Economies grind to a halt, not because resources have vanished, but because the collective faith has cracked. The implications ripple into daily life. Every mortgage is faith in the future, a bet that decades of payments will be possible, that your labor will endure, that the house will remain yours. Every pension fund is faith in the future, the trust that money set aside now will still hold value when you are too old to work. Every government bond, every retirement plan, every promise of deferred wages, all are threads of faith extending into tomorrow. And yet, none of them are guaranteed. They exist only because society collectively chooses to believe. Take another pause and reflect on your own faith in the future. When you set aside money, do you truly know that it will be there when you need it? Or are you, like everyone else, taking a leap of trust into uncertainty, guided by hope more than knowledge? This realization can be unsettling, but also strangely calming. It reminds us that all of humanity moves forward not with certainty, but with shared belief. Faith in the future is not just about money. It is about survival, about continuity, about the willingness to walk into the unknown together. And yet, this faith carries contradictions. It can bind societies into stability, but it can also be exploited. Governments borrow against the future, piling debts onto generations that have not yet spoken. Corporations promise pensions they may never deliver. Individuals build lives on the assumption that their savings will hold value, only to find that inflation or collapse has eaten them away. Faith in the future is both the fuel of prosperity and the shadow of risk. It is the reason we build, but also the reason we fall when belief fails. Still, perhaps the most haunting realization is that without this faith, we would not move at all. No one would plant seeds if they did not trust the harvest would come. No one would build homes if they did not believe they would last. No one would save, invest, or work beyond the moment if they did not carry faith in the future. Money crystallizes this faith into a symbol, making tomorrow feel solid enough to shape our actions today. It is not certainty, it is the illusion of certainty, and that illusion is enough to sustain civilization. As we drift forward, the question emerges. If money is anchored in faith in the future, what sustains that faith? What gives us the confidence to keep walking forward into the unknown? The answer lies in another illusion, another quiet truth. The belief that our work has meaning, that our labor will always be recognized and rewarded. For if money is faith in the future, then work is the tether that ties us to it. And so the journey continues, flowing gently from faith in the future into trust in work, where the hours we give today become the currency of tomorrow. Trust in work. Trust in work is one of the deepest and most quietly unquestioned foundations of money, and perhaps even of society itself. It is the idea that when you give your hours, your energy, your labor, something real, something irretrievable, you will be recognized and rewarded in return. Without this belief, without this bond, the very exchange that sustains economies would dissolve. Work is not merely activity, it is an offering of life itself, a portion of your limited time on this earth. Every time you clock in, every time you lift, type, calculate, teach, heal, or build, you are placing trust in a silent contract, that the world will return your effort with sustenance, shelter, safety, or future comfort. To live in a system of money is to live in constant reliance on this promise, even when we do not consciously think about it. And yet, once we pause to notice, the strangeness of this trust becomes overwhelming. Think of what it means to trade work for wages. You give away something irrecoverable, an hour, an afternoon, a decade, and in return, you receive numbers on a screen or slips of paper. You trust that those numbers will later convert back into food, into clothes, into rent, into the small luxuries that make life more than survival. But in truth, you never hold the value itself. You only hold a placeholder, a symbol of value. This is why trust in work is not just about the effort itself, but about the larger network of faith that effort will be remembered, honored, and repaid. It is a chain of belief stretching outward. You trust your employer to pay you. They trust the bank to hold your wages. The store trusts the bank to process your payment, and the farmer trusts the store to exchange your money for the grain they grew. At every step, it is not the work itself that circulates, but the promise that work has been done and that work will continue to be done. Pause here and consider how fragile this system really is. What if wages are not paid? What if the hours you gave are lost in a bankruptcy, or consumed by inflation, or dismissed by an unfair system? Suddenly, the trust collapses, and the exchange breaks down. History gives us countless examples. Workers cheated of their pay, farmers abandoned when crops failed, entire populations laboring under systems where their work was not fairly recognized. Trust in work has always been both the most sacred and the most violated of contracts. And yet, even with this fragility, societies continue to run on it because the alternative is unbearable. Without trust in work, nothing moves. This concept stretches beyond wages into the very meaning of labor. Work is not only the action of the hands or the mind, but the essence of human contribution to the world. When a sculptor chisels marble, when a mother nurtures her child, when a teacher plants ideas into young minds, all of these are forms of work. Yet not all of them are equally rewarded in money. This disparity reveals a hidden truth. Trust in work is not simply about effort. It is about recognition. Society collectively decides which forms of work are rewarded and which are ignored. Some of the hardest and most necessary labor, like caregiving or raising children, is often unpaid or underpaid. Meanwhile, abstract forms of labor like speculation or financial engineering can bring vast rewards. This reveals the haunting reality that trust in work is not an even contract, but a selective one. Some forms of human effort are seen, others are invisible, and money only flows where recognition is given. And yet, despite this unevenness, the trust persists. The farmer still sows fields each season. The nurse still tends to patients through the night. The laborer still builds with hands calloused by repetition. Why? Because to stop would mean to admit that the system may not return value for effort. To work is to lean on the hope that effort will eventually be acknowledged, even if imperfectly. The faith that tomorrow's paycheck will arrive, that tomorrow's customers will buy, that tomorrow's needs will still create demand for your skill, that faith keeps society alive. It is here that the implications begin to twist into paradox. Trust in work gives meaning to human lives because it ties action to reward, effort to recognition. Yet it also enslaves because it demands that individuals continue to labor even when the recognition is unfair or delayed. The worker who is underpaid continues to show up because the alternative, starvation, homelessness, isolation, is worse. In this way, trust in work binds us as much as it sustains us. We are not only creatures of labor, we are prisoners of the belief that without labor, we do not deserve to survive. This belief, deeply ingrained, rarely questioned, is one of the greatest illusions of money. Reflect on your own life for a moment. How much of your day is shaped by work, by the trust that your efforts will secure your tomorrow? How much of your identity is tied to what you do, rather than who you are? The question itself exposes another layer of the paradox. Trust in work is not just about survival, but about meaning. To work is to claim value in the eyes of others, to justify one's existence through contribution. Without work, many feel adrift, unseen, irrelevant. And so, society continues to perpetuate the belief that to be human is to be productive, as though our worth depends on our output. Historically, cultures have both honored and distorted this trust. Ancient guilds and crafts gave pride to work, embedding dignity and skill. Religious traditions sanctified labor as a way of serving the divine. Yet the industrial age transformed this dignity into mechanization, reducing workers to cogs, their hours measured and dissected. Trust in work became less about respect and more about efficiency, less about contribution and more about profit. In today's digital age, the transformation continues. Algorithms manage workers, gig economies atomize labor into tasks, and trust in work is mediated by apps and platforms rather than human hands. Still, beneath the layers of technology, the same fragile belief hums. Give your time, give your energy, and you will be repaid. But what if this trust weakens? What happens when entire generations begin to doubt that their work will lead to security? When wages stagnate, when the cost of living rises, when automation threatens jobs, when institutions no longer guarantee pensions? The erosion of trust in work creates unrest, despair, and disconnection. Societies fracture when people no longer believe their effort will be rewarded fairly. And yet, this erosion also reveals something liberating. If trust in work is a human construct, then perhaps it can be reshaped. Perhaps labor can be decoupled from mere survival, allowing worth to be recognized beyond output. Perhaps work itself can be reimagined, not as chains, but as contribution freely given and fairly valued. Take a breath here and imagine a world where trust in work was absolute, where no effort went unrecognized, where every act of labor was honored. Such a world may be impossible, but its dream reveals the depth of our longing. We do not only want money for our hours, we want meaning for our lives. And in this desire, trust in work becomes not only an economic truth, but a spiritual one. It asks us to believe that what we do matters, even when the world fails to pay us back in full. Yet as we drift deeper into this reflection, we see that trust in work cannot stand alone. It is intertwined with another force, a quieter undercurrent that explains why we place value on labor at all. If work is effort given, then value is the story we tell about that effort. the meaning we assign to it, the reason we believe it matters. And so the journey continues. From the trust we place in work, we move naturally into the psychology of value, where worth is not inherent, but constructed, where effort is not only measured, but interpreted. For if money depends on trust, and trust depends on work, then work itself depends on the fragile, shifting perceptions of value. And that is where the next layer of the story begins to unfold. The psychology of value. The psychology of value is one of the most quietly fascinating and unsettling forces that shape our world, because it reveals that what we call worth is not something absolute, not something carved into stone or written in the fabric of the universe, but a story told and believed collectively. Why does a diamond, a lump of compressed carbon, command such staggering prices, while water, which sustains life itself, often flows freely and cheaply from a tap? Why does an artist's painting, ignored during their lifetime, sell for millions centuries later? Why does one currency rise against another even when nothing about the actual goods of a nation has changed? All of these questions lead back to the strange, shifting theater of human psychology, where belief, perception, and desire create value out of nothing, or strip it away in an instant. It is not so much the object itself that matters, but the lens through which we see it, the stories we tell about it, and the trust we place in those stories. Consider the example of gold. For centuries, it has been treated as inherently valuable, a substance worthy of being stored in vaults and used as the ultimate backing for currencies. Yet why? Gold has no nutritional value, no unique property that makes it indispensable to survival. It gleams, it resists tarnish, it can be shaped into ornaments. These qualities are desirable but not life-defining, and yet humanity elevated it to the status of eternal wealth. The psychology of value transformed a mineral into a god of economies. This transformation reveals something profound. Value is not an essence that objects carry. It is a projection of collective imagination. When enough people agree to a story, that story becomes reality. But here lies the paradox. If value is psychological, then it is also fragile. It can be inflated, deflated, destroyed, or conjured seemingly overnight. A brand can rise to prominence because of clever marketing, convincing millions that one logo, one symbol, one name confers status, while a competitor selling an identical product languishes unnoticed. A cryptocurrency can go from worth pennies to billions in collective market cap, not because its intrinsic function changed, but because collective excitement surged like a wave, lifting it upward. Then, just as quickly, that wave can collapse, and the value vanishes into thin air. The psychology of value is the psychology of crowds, of belief systems, of collective hallucinations. It is both mesmerizing and terrifying, because it means that what we depend on as wealth is not grounded in permanence, but in agreement. Take a moment to reflect on your own life and ask, what do you own that truly has value? And what do you own that only has value because others agree it does? Your phone, your car, your house, each of these is useful, but their price is not simply determined by their utility. A house in one neighborhood may cost 10 times more than an identical one elsewhere, simply because of perceived prestige, safety, or convenience. A phone from one company may command double the price of another with nearly the same hardware, simply because of the logo on the back. Even human labor is subject to this psychology. Two people may work equally hard, but their work is valued differently depending on the cultural narrative surrounding their profession. A celebrity athlete can earn in a single night what a teacher might not earn in a lifetime, not because their work is inherently more vital to human flourishing, but because society has collectively decided to lavish value on one narrative and neglect another. This realization can feel liberating or crushing, depending on how you hold it. On one hand, it reveals the infinite flexibility of human imagination. We can create value where none existed, and we can shape meaning together. On the other hand, it reveals how arbitrary and unjust these systems can be. If value is a story, then those who control the narrative governments, corporations, media, cultural institutions wield extraordinary power over what is seen as worthwhile. They do not merely report on value, they manufacture it. This is why advertising has such a profound hold over modern economies. It doesn't just promote products, it reshapes desire itself, embedding new stories of value into the minds of millions. But the psychology of value is not only about external manipulation. It also lives deeply inside us, shaping how we see ourselves. Self-worth often becomes tangled with market worth. We are taught, subtly and explicitly, to measure our identities by salaries, possessions, achievements, or recognition. To earn more is to be more. To own more is to become more visible, more respected, more valuable as a human being. This is one of the most insidious effects of money's grip on psychology. It persuades us to internalize value as identity, to confuse market signals with personal worth. In this way, the psychology of value colonizes not only the economy, but the human spirit. Now imagine societies across history through this lens. The value of shells in ancient trade, the worth of spices that launched voyages across oceans, the allure of silk that bound empires together. Each of these moments was not dictated by inherent necessity, but by human psychology. Spices do not keep us alive. Silk does not feed us. Yet they became treasures because stories of rarity, beauty, and desire infused them with meaning. The psychology of value made them worth fighting wars over. In modern times, the same principle continues, though disguised in new forms. Digital icons, pixels arranged into non-fungible tokens, have been sold for millions, though they can be copied endlessly. What people pay for is not the pixels, but the story of ownership, the prestige of exclusivity. Again, it is the narrative, not the object, that creates the value. This invites us to consider a chilling question. If value is always a story, what happens when the story ends? When trust erodes, when desire shifts, when a new narrative takes over, the value collapses. Empires have fallen because their currency lost its psychological grip. Companies have vanished because their brand lost its shine. Entire economies have crumbled because people no longer believe the story of their money. And yet, in the ashes, new stories always rise. This cycle reveals the perpetual fragility of wealth. It is never more secure than the minds that uphold it. Pause again and reflect on the objects around you. Imagine them stripped of their price tags, stripped of their cultural narratives. A chair is wood, a ring is metal, a bill is paper. What would remain of value if no one believed in the stories attached to them? Perhaps only utility would survive. The chair for sitting, the ring for decoration, the bill for kindling. And yet, in our actual lives, we rarely encounter objects this way. Instead, we are surrounded by layers of meaning, layers of imagined worth that transform the world into a marketplace of psychological constructs. The implications stretch even further into the way we understand time, relationships, and even love. A watch, a family heirloom, may be worthless on the open market, but priceless to you because of the memories it carries. A handwritten letter may have no resale value, but it may hold more meaning than any diamond ring. Here, the psychology of value shows its most intimate side. It is not just about markets, but about meaning itself. We assign value not only through collective narratives, but through personal narratives, private stories that weave worth into the fabric of our lives. And so, the paradox crystallizes. Value is at once real and unreal, binding and fragile, universal and deeply personal. It is created in the minds of millions and in the heart of one. This is what makes the psychology of value both endlessly fascinating and profoundly unsettling. It forces us to admit that there is no objective bedrock beneath the wealth we chase, only layers of faith, trust, and perception. As you drift deeper into this thought, let it settle gently. Money does not simply measure value. It creates it, reshapes it, manipulates it. And behind the numbers, behind the markets, behind the glitter of gold and the glow of screens, there is always this psychological theater, invisible but inescapable. Perhaps it is here that money shows its greatest power. Not in vaults, not in banks, not in ledgers, but in the collective mind. And from this stage, we move toward the closing chapter of this exploration. For if value itself is a story, then what remains is to face the last story, the most haunting one, the illusion that underpins them all, the story that claims to be final. In the end, we are left to ask whether money itself, in all its forms, is the ultimate illusion, the greatest act of faith humanity has ever performed. The final illusion. The final illusion is the most haunting, the most elusive, and perhaps the most unsettling truth of all. That money itself, in every form it takes, is nothing more than a story. Every coin, every bill, every number glowing on a digital screen is not wealth in itself, but a symbol pointing toward something else. A belief, an agreement, a faith that others will honor its power. Strip away that collective belief, and the system collapses. What once seemed solid turns suddenly to dust. What once gave shape to lives becomes meaningless scraps of paper, forgotten stones, obsolete code in some long-abandoned server. And yet, as fragile as this illusion is, it is also the most enduring trick humanity has ever performed. Civilizations rise and fall, currencies come and go, and still the story persists, wearing new costumes, but whispering the same enchantment. Trust me, I am valuable. It is significant because it forces us to face an uncomfortable paradox. We live our lives, shape our futures, and measure our worth against a system that does not exist outside of our own collective imagination. It is not that money has no power, it clearly does, but that its power flows not from itself, but from us. It is a mirror in which we see our faith reflected back. And in that reflection lies both the strength and the danger. The strength, because this illusion allows millions of strangers to cooperate, to build, to trade, to grow. The danger, because when the illusion falters, when trust cracks, the entire edifice can crumble in days. Think of the Weimar Republic, where paper notes became so devalued they were used as wallpaper. Think of financial crashes, when confidence evaporates and markets spiral into chaos. In each case, the illusion slipped, and with it, the scaffolding of society trembled. The explanation for why this illusion works lies deep in our nature. Human beings are storytellers. Long before we wrote laws or printed money, we gathered around fires and shared myths. Those myths gave us meaning, direction, and cohesion. Money is simply the most successful myth humanity has ever told. Because it does not just explain the world, it organizes it. Unlike myths of gods or ancestors which inspire, money actively directs behavior. It is the myth that moves armies, builds cities, sparks revolutions, and tethers every one of us to its rhythm. And because it is so useful, we forget it is a story. We treat it as reality itself, as if the numbers in our accounts are as real as the air we breathe or the food we eat. But they are not. They are symbols of trust, fragile placeholders for promises, no more real than the ink on a page until we agree that they are. Consider the way money transforms when its illusion is revealed. A bill from a collapsed currency is still the same piece of paper it was yesterday, and yet it has lost its magic. A cryptocurrency token that once traded for fortunes can plunge to near zero, not because the code changed, but because the story changed. A nation's currency can gain or lose strength overnight based on rumors, on shifting confidence, on belief itself. These examples make clear what we often resist admitting. Value does not live in objects but in our shared agreement. The illusion is not in the paper or the coin. It is in us. And perhaps the most humbling truth is that we cannot escape it. Even if we reject one form of money, we inevitably create another, because our minds hunger for systems of trust, for symbols of exchange, for shared myths to bind us together. The implications are profound. If money is the final illusion, then our lives are lived inside a story we cannot quite step outside of. Every choice, every dream, every sacrifice is weighed against an invisible narrative that we ourselves sustain. This realization can be freeing. It means we have the power to rewrite the story, to reshape value, to imagine new forms of trust. But it can also be deeply unsettling, because it means that nothing is as fixed as it seems. The jobs we work for decades, the savings we cling to, the debts we labor under, all of these could vanish if the story changes. And history reminds us that stories always change. Empires crumble, currencies collapse, faiths dissolve. What feels eternal is only temporary, suspended on the fragile thread of collective belief. Take a moment here to reflect on how much of your own life is bound to this illusion. Think of the hours you've traded for pay, the plans you've made for retirement, the debts you've carried, the purchases you've dreamed of. Each one is a bet on the endurance of the story of money. Each one is an act of trust in something that has no physical anchor, no permanent guarantee. The recognition of this fragility can feel frightening, but it can also feel strangely peaceful. Because once you see the illusion for what it is, you are less likely to be trapped by it. You can step back, breathe, and remember that money is not reality itself. It is a lens, a tool, a collective spell. And here lies the greatest contradiction. Even knowing it is an illusion, we cannot do without it. Like oxygen, it surrounds us, invisible but necessary. We wake, we work, we plan, we rest, all within its logic. Even philosophers who reject the chase for wealth must acknowledge the system that sustains their lives. Money is the final illusion not because it is false, but because it is so deeply woven into reality that it becomes indistinguishable from it. It is an illusion that has become real through sheer collective belief, a dream that millions dream together until it solidifies into walls, roads, markets, and nations. And yet, even as it binds us, it reminds us of the fragility of everything we build. To see money as illusion is to recognize the impermanence of human systems. It humbles us. It invites us to ask, what remains when the story ends? What endures when currencies vanish and economies crumble? Perhaps only the unpurchased moments, the touch of a loved one, the beauty of a sunset, the quiet breath in the dark. Those remain untouched by money's illusion. And maybe that is where we find the deeper truth, that beyond the final illusion lies the reality of life itself, fleeting and priceless. And so, as we drift further into this reflection, let the thought settle. Money is the story we live within, the final illusion that defines and confines us. But tonight, you need not wrestle with its weight. Tonight, you can let the illusion fade into the background, like mist in the morning light. For beyond the illusion lies rest, the one currency that no market can sell. And it is to that rest we now turn, gently shifting from the final illusion into a softer space, an outro designed not to explain or persuade, but simply to guide you toward stillness. From the theater of money's myths, let us step quietly into the silence beyond them, into the gentle wind down that awaits. Every coin, every note, every glowing number on a screen is a story. That is where we must end, because it is also where we began. Not with weight, not with substance, not even with necessity, but with a tale, a shared trust whispered across generations, reshaped by empires, carried into our present day, and projected endlessly into our future. When you touch money, when you hold it or glance at it or think about it, you are not touching wealth itself. You are touching a story that others agreed to believe alongside you. That fragile thread of belief is what binds us into an economy, into a society, into the illusion that the world runs on something solid. And as you lie here, letting the edges of thought blur, you might pause to consider how astonishing this truly is. The greatest force of coordination in human history exists entirely within the fragile theater of imagination. Take a moment to breathe with that thought. Inhale the weight of the day. Exhale the realization that none of the coins, none of the numbers, none of the debts are as solid as they feel. They are smoke, woven into form by the persistence of shared faith. It does not mean they are useless. It means they are spectral, sustained only so long as we all agree to keep dreaming the same dream. And yet, isn't it beautiful in a way that humanity can dream together so vividly, so convincingly, that whole civilizations can be built on nothing more than a story? The bridges we cross, the food we eat, the homes we sleep in, all tethered by numbers flickering in accounts, by signatures written on paper, by promises of trust. Perhaps this is the paradox that soothes and unsettles us at once, that true wealth is not in the objects we hold, but in the invisible bonds between us. When you receive a coin, you receive not metal, but the faith of strangers. When you look at your bank account, you are not gazing at reality, but at a measure of trust that millions have agreed to honor. And when you hand over a bill for bread, you are participating in the same quiet ritual that has echoed since shells and stones were exchanged under ancient skies. We trust, and because we trust, the world works. Remove that trust, and the illusion collapses. Nurture it, and the illusion lives on. Pause now, and imagine the world stripped bare of these stories. No notes, no coins, no numbers on glowing screens, just people, and land, and time. Would it be chaos, or would it be freedom? Would it mean loss, or would it reveal that the truest wealth was always elsewhere, in our capacity to cooperate, to imagine, to share? These are not questions you must answer now. They are seeds for quiet reflection, gentle companions as you drift towards sleep. The point is not to solve them, but to let them drift like clouds in your mind, reshaping themselves into new patterns as you rest. And so, perhaps the greatest wealth is not the paper or the code, but the delicate human agreement that gives them meaning. Agreements so subtle, you forget you are participating in them. Agreements so fragile they can collapse overnight. Agreements so powerful, they can build empires and topple kings. Agreements like whispers, sometimes barely heard, but always present, always there in the background, guiding the rhythm of life. This hour has been about uncovering those whispers, about drawing your attention not to the obvious shine of coins or the cold logic of numbers, but to the invisible foundation beneath them. You have walked through illusions, through paradoxes, through the strange dream that is money. And yet, here at the end, the lesson is simple. Money is not an object, but a story of trust. Let that thought soften you. Let it loosen the grip of worry, because if money is only a story, then it cannot own you completely. Stories can be rewritten. Stories can be set aside. Stories can fade. You are more than the numbers assigned to you, more than the wages or debts or balances you carry. You are the storyteller, not only the character. That is the secret money does not want you to notice. That it depends on you, on your belief, on your trust. Without you, without us, it vanishes. With us, it thrives. So tonight, you do not need to calculate. You do not need to budget. You do not need to wonder what tomorrow's numbers will look like. For now, trust that this hour is yours. Nothing more is required of you than to rest in the gentle truth that the world can wait. Close your eyes and let the stories slip away for a while. The coins can stay in their drawers. The accounts can wait in their quiet servers. The world will continue to spin on the illusion, but you do not need to carry it. Not tonight. Take a breath, and with that breath, release the weight of money's story. Release the thought of debts unpaid, of hours exchanged, of prices looming. Let them dissolve one by one, as if they were written in chalk and the rain has come. What remains is only you, lying here, with the rhythm of your breath, the softness of your bed, the quiet of this hour. What remains is something beyond money, something untouched by illusion, the gift of sleep. Sleep well, drift gently. And may your dreams be free of debt. May they carry you into spaces where no coin is needed, where no contract binds, where no illusion weighs heavy on your mind. May your dreams remind you of what is priceless: peace, rest, breath, and being. Let the whisper of trust accompany you. Not the trust in banks or notes or screens, but the trust in yourself, the trust that tonight you can let go. And so, with gratitude for your presence and for your listening, I leave you with this final thought. Every coin, every note, every number is a story, but tonight you are free to step outside that story. For now, this hour is yours. Sleep well, drift gently. Rest in the freedom of knowing that for at least this night, you owe nothing. Sweet dreams.